that I see in today's meeting, I find that really helpful, because one of the kind of take-home messages that I have is that everything counts. So let me begin then with why do we need to work with young people and sexualities?
Sorry, Divya, sorry to interrupt. The PowerPoint isn't viewed full screen. It's still in.
Oh, okay. So how do I do that? F5. Okay, right. So why do we need to work with young people and sexualities? And actually, the question is what sexuality does, or what does sexuality do, and what can young people do as well? I'm going to come to these questions, which in the last 2.5 decades, and how these questions have shifted, and why we need to ask different sorts of questions, and why our methodologies and our theories need to alter in order to dilate the frame that we currently have. So the problems are ongoing. The issues remain perplexing. The issues around sexuality and its intimacy with sexual violence, with teenage pregnancy, those issues remain enduring problems. And then the question is, what can we do as researchers in trying to elaborate further on what might work in terms of addressing the scourge that we currently face? So this is a sort of kind of overview of what I want to achieve in the next 30 minutes or so. So the first question then is, why do we need to work with young people and sexualities? And I guess all of us here understand that in this country, we are facing a calamity. So just recently, we've been, the sensationalization of 23,000 girls under the age of 18 who gave birth in the Gauteng province. I'm very interested to see what those statistics might mean provincially, but also nationally. Whilst I emphasize this clipping from a newspaper article, the problem is the sensationalization. It is indeed a problem, but the dramatization of this and the effects this has on girls in particular in relation to blame and shame. I'll come back to that. Another clipping in relation to the ongoing concerns about young people in school and out of school who face sexual violence and who have to navigate an environment that is unsafe. I mean, I could give you a list and a host of media reports on the issues about why sexualities matter. And again, another issue around violence, masculinity, and in a Tableview High School recently. So let me then begin with what I think is fundamentally the way in which I work with young sexualities. And that is, if I can go to the slide here, is follow the young people. And by that, I mean that if we are to improve our current theoretical and methodological lens, and if we are to better understand what is necessary for young people, we need to follow the young. We need to ensure that their lives and their identities are made central in any attempt to develop programs or to intervene. So that is basically my fundamental position. And if you leave the session, and today's, it's that which remains really significant in how we come to think about what to do. So I'm currently working on a book that looks at girls and the kind of broader sexualized media and pornographic environment. And one of the issues that stands out for me is the cleavage between the dominant discourse of childhood sexual innocence. And that might sound really boring. And for me, it's like a narrative that has played out for the last 25 years of my research. And it seems to be, unchanging in terms of its force in shaping and limiting what we can do. So, and I also want to remain faithful in this conversation that I'm having with you today in relation to the fundamental focus, which is on what young people have to say. So the starting point here, if we do not allow for spaces for young people to be comfortable, to engage in questions and engage in issues that they themselves think are relevant, then we can make no headway. So here we have the concern that is being raised, and this has been repeated in our research, is that sex is aligned to secrecy and is aligned to an underground world, which adult parents, policymakers, teachers who remain significant partners in the work towards sexual justice, in the work towards better and healthier lives for young people. This issue remains a problem. And the question then is, to what extent can we work with key actors in young people's lives to ensure in some way to open up and expand this, this narrative around sexual innocence, which does nothing but harm and permit a kind of secrecy and provides no means for young people to access the sort of resources that they need for better lives. Now, this is another a quote that I picked up from this current study, and maybe I should just briefly mention that my research focuses on a widespread race and class context, provinces, whilst it's, the KwaZulu-Natal province remains quite central to my work. The work extends across provinces, and the study is based on very privileged girls in a very privileged private school, all-girls school, and their narratives about what they do in relation to sexuality. One of the problems that we find in researching young sexualities is a heavy focus on young people in poverty-stricken environments. And whilst that remains important work to do, we also need to have a broader understanding of the sexual environments through which all South Africans navigate. Race and class remain important in trying to illustrate the complexity in relation to young sexualities. So this just reinforces the notion around, being in the dark, and the problems that even girls in very privileged schools with great access to resources, that this issue around sexuality and its association with harm, with danger, with taboo, remains an issue that we really need to open up and have more interventions to change that narrative. Now, I've already mentioned the focus of my work is on follow the young, and by following the young, I asked the question: what if we follow the narratives of young people rather than the narratives of adults and parents and teachers and and a host of other significant actors, but also a narrative from policy, which can be quite complex and quite contradictory. So in the first instance, the Department of Education's policy around sexualities often fails to address the issue around pleasure, around desire. 2 years ago, there was a great deal of concern raised by the South African society in relation to a comprehensive sexuality education and masturbation. And these concerns return to the initial issue, which is around the childhood sexual innocence and these narratives, which really serve to harm young people. In this study that I'm currently completing, I have to say that the role of the researcher and the requires significant attention. And what does that mean then for interventions as well? It means that the shock value, the capacity for young people to shock, remains an issue that we ourselves need to address. So having worked in this field for so long, what fascinated me is the knowledge that 14 to 18-year-old girls have about sex and sexuality, to such an extent that I had to start Googling the words and trying to understand what these words actually meant. And in doing so, I had to challenge myself about their knowledge in relation to recollecting my own narratives as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, understanding the transformative environment which permits girls to have such knowledge, but also reflecting on my own questions about how is it possible for them to know? So even despite advocating to address and to focus on what young people say, what they do, how they act, when I do focus on that and when they do shock, the notion around sexual innocence seems to creep into how we think young people and young girls should behave. So what I'm suggesting here is the problematic notion of the adult researcher or the adult teacher or the parent in confronting the realities of young people's sexual lives. So I'm not going to focus too much on this, but I think that methodologically a focus and a close-up account of how young people shape sexualities remains important, but also how we begin to theorize and re-theorize from below. So often my focus has been on a social structural contextualization, ensuring that the real lives of young people matter within their situated context. But in recent times, I have found that this too is problematic because it misses out on a large area of work. And I take heed here of new feminist materialism in terms of understanding the forms of the content, the expression, the language, the emotions, the feelings, the discourses. And I could continue with this list in relation to how young people are capacitated within particular context. New feminist materialism would use the word assemblage, and perhaps in the French they say assemblage, but I'm going to say assemblage. And how this assemblage permits particular capacities and limits particular capacities. So to go back to the work that I'm currently doing in relation to social network systems and pornographic platforms and, social media, and how that interacts with young people. What this means is for us to broaden the scope of our work and to understand how things and objects and spaces and feelings and emotions shape what we can now see and how we can expand our understanding of what capacitates and what incapacitates young sexualities. So I want to give you an example of this. So in the context of a very privileged a school setting or a broader family background, the iPad, the laptop, the cell phone, the range of resources, the access to DSTV, the access to Netflix, all of this provides the basis upon which we can understand that sex is everywhere through the everyday, ordinary lives of young South Africans. And yet, the contradiction between this everyday ordinariness of what I called, the porn world or the pornographic platforms, and then the refusal for us to accept that young people are knowledgeable and make sense of, thrive, are curious about sex and sexuality. And that in working with these young people, their reflections go back even in their teenage years, when they reflect and recollect their sense of sex and sexuality. It takes them right back to age 5 or 6 or age 9 in terms of how they remember how they expanded upon their curiosities right under the gaze of adult scrutiny, whilst allowing for the mockery of childhood sexual innocence. So I think when I come to this question about what young people have taught me over 2 or more decades of researching gender and young sexualities, over and over again, we need to remember that young people know. And I think that, and they know, and that the realization that they know more than we can ever imagine, and that in order to know what they know, we have to respect and provide them with the platforms to allow them to talk about sex in ways that break down the barriers between adult and child in relation to what is taboo and what is not. Over and over again, I am reminded that young people are pleasure-seeking, they have sexual interests, they have desires, and that these desires are acted upon with no support, with little attention to the forms of support that they need. And this remains a problem. And in relation to the larger context in the country, it is no surprise then that we have a context that we're currently located in, where young people, unwanted pregnancy, issues around, lack of consent, issues around violence. It is no wonder that these problems continue, because we have made no headway in terms of addressing these kind of basic but fundamental problems. The research has also shown that young people feel, and this connects very much to this theorizing around new feminist materialism, which sort of breaks down and flattens the boundary between the so-called psychosocial and material world, and allows us to have such a broader and comprehensive understanding of the ways in which the social, the spaces, the feelings, the desires, the gendered discourses, the objects and the things all come together in how we understand their capacities. Now, this is the fourth bullet here around gender norms remains an enduring problem as well. It is these norms which require our attention. And how do we address this when the fundamental issues around same-sex remains outside our current interventions? So these norms continue to harm girls, but they also harm boys. The issues around sex and contraception, the use of power, the ability of men and masculinities and boys to use power in relation to these gendered and cultural norms to express their sexuality, limiting the capacities of girls, remains problematic. And in no way here do I want to suggest girls' inability and passivity, because part of the problem in this country is the continued reliance on girls as vulnerable, as passive. Indeed, the statistics will point to their vulnerability in terms of gender and sexual violence. The earlier clippings point to that. However, girls are without support, without adequate resources, without interventions, are creatively engaging with sexualities right under our noses. One of the issues that also was, there's so many that I would not be able to deal with all of them, but cheating remained an issue. And I wonder whether any intervention program might consider that young people, even at age 14, would be affected deeply by the cheating. And this is connected then to gender norms, masculinity making, and vulnerability in relation to accepting cheating boyfriends in order to fulfill some sort of a desire to remain in a relationship. So these sort of nuanced ways in which we can think about what we might be able to do and what we address remains important. The second last bullet point refers to this notion that girls want money and boys want virgins. And here I want to contextualize this in relation to specific context. And in this country, we are traversing kind of a wide spread inequalities, variations in the sociocultural context, and how transactional relations, how the desire for a better life, and the way in which sex and sexuality can be used as a resource to aspire to or to achieve that middle class status. So in many instances, just going to a mall or having a cell phone remains an attraction. And in most recently, I asked a question, and now it's like, oh, we want PlayStations or we want Xbox. So in relation to this, the dilemma here is to engage with girls in particular and warn them about and demonize sugar daddies. Indeed, there is no way that I am condoning such age inequalities and such relations. However, what might an intervention program be like when we understand that this is happening? And instead of cautioning girls against sugar daddy relationships, and this might sound sensational, But instead of cautioning girls, instead of judging, moralizing, why is it not possible for us to say, these are potential relationships? If you do engage in those relationships, condom use, contraception might be a way to go. The last bullet point, I mean, I've done, as I said, there were so many issues that I could talk about, but these also remain challenges in relation to early childbearing and how this impacts on the ability to complete school. I want to focus here on the young fathers and the extent to which research needs to address the particular manifestation of gender masculinities in and across young people's lives. Whilst there has been emerging work since 2009, I don't think that there has been sufficient work. And the recognition of young teenage fathers is not even addressed in the white paper on families. I here is just a repeat of the kind of central message around young people's knowledge, and also though the ways in which religion and young people's sexual curiosity remains an aspect of their everyday lives. According to the policy guideline, about 2 years ago, there was a call for debate and responses to this to policy being framed to ban porn access for young people. And one of the recommendations in that was to ensure that all devices that young people have access to, that all devices should be should have an imperative upon cell phone companies and to ensure that there was a blocking device. So I call it block porn. And in contrast, and this is not to create a dichotomy, but in contrast to this block porn narrative, I suggest that children and young people are playing porn. And when we think about that word porn, I can imagine the sensationalization of that word. It is the height of horror, confronting the young people's sexuality in ways that will elicit emotional responses that frame innocence and frame vulnerability and frame young people as passive. The argument here that I'm making is that porn is everywhere. Because if we understand, and remember there's huge debates about what porn means. For these girls, porn may mean hardcore porn, but that is not the central aspect of what porn is. Porn is sexual imagery found all over, found in the billboards and in the advertising, found in magazines, found in DSTV magazines, found in Cosmopolitan. And this notion that we need to block devices in order to prevent young people's access to porn is again another example of the contradiction. What this also suggests is that whilst porn and young sexualities remain inimical to each other and sensationalized, porn as a broader narrative remains untouched. And what I'm suggesting here is that when we think about sexuality, we need to think about it in its diversity and in its expansive ways through which young people are accessing and learning about it. And they do so, as this slide will illustrate, in really playful ways. So whilst one might consider a discussion of, sex and sexuality and this word porn as something that is taboo and is unacceptable, when you talk to young people, they play with the word and they play with sexuality in ways that suggests, which is far detached from that, the horror that we as adults think that, that they receive it in that way. I have focused on this issue around religion, and that remains an important barrier to how we address sex and sexuality. I'm going to come back to the slide here, because the slide refers to the issue that I mentioned around young fathers. And again, for the dominant discourse around young people and what is permitted, what is permissible, the notion that young people can fall in love at 14. I have no idea why adults still find that perplexing. And this is Clinton, a teenage father, who is now recounting the narrative of how becoming a father all happened. I'm going to, give you a sense of what's going on here in relation to, how do we access young people's thoughts, their curiosities? How do we make this possible? How do we work with young people? And here's an example of how this all happens, because if sex and sexuality, and if the word porn and sexually explicit materials remains problematic, well, actually, these are the drawings from young people themselves. And one could see here Geordie Shore and the Games of Thrones, and how the connection is made on an everyday basis to sex and sexuality. And that young people know, girls know. And this next slide would, suggest the kind of diverse and complex thoughts that they have, which they can verbalize, but they can also illustrate. And this sort of methodology in working with young people to engage with what might be seen as obscene really provides another inroad into expanding and dilating what we can currently do. So, and of course, that first fetish I had to Google and understand, as I had to for several of the words and the knowledge that young people had, and I had to understand what was strap-on. And this is what 14 to 18-year-old girls know. So what can we do? And I'm not sure about my time, but I haven't been stopped. And I want to say everything counts. And that makes the work around interventions challenging, but not impossible. Everything counts. And I am also reflecting on this notion that the words around gender equality, the idea about how do we understand gender and sexuality, I think that too requires revisioning, because there can't be some sort of fixed definition of these concepts, because they're ever changing. The fact that we are aspiring towards gender equality, and I do that in much of my work, but we also need to understand that term itself can be ossified, can be considered a doctrinaire that is problematic if we think that we can achieve something called gender equality. And this relates directly to theorizing in terms of understanding that everything is in process. And this thus points to the ongoing interventions, understanding how different things come together to produce different capacities. So I've talked quite a lot about challenging sexual innocence. Even to say sex in all stages and phases of young people's lives, it remains a challenge. So what to do? Can we not just say sex? All interventions should focus on romance, love, cheating, desire, pleasure, but also the erotics. And that is an issue which I found being illustrated in terms of what young people want. Young people, and this is a point that has been often rehearsed in this country and elsewhere. Young people are tired of this biomedical reproductive health focus. Young people are tired of being told that sex is danger, and that the more they say sex is danger, the more we have, the context that we are currently experiencing. So what if we try something new? What if, and I know that this might be sensational, but what if we try to consider a sexuality education program or any sort of intervention that deals with what young people want? And those illustrations suggest to me that young people want to know about sex beyond what we currently are providing them with. In relation to first-time sex, I thought that this was quite an important part of this current book that I'm working on. And I think that requires more in-depth focus. When you are 14 or 13 or 15, you really want to know what sex is, what first-time sex might mean. And this was quite a dominant first-time sex. It was very dominant in how teenage girls suggested to me. Yes.
I was thinking perhaps we can continue this in the discussion.
Okay, brilliant. So let me then, I had no idea about the timing, so I failed to even consider the time. Thank you. I thought you'd, but thanks so much. So I'm going to quickly conclude by saying, you know what, there is so much more that we can do. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present. And as you can see, this is just ongoing, it's complex, and it requires so much more work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Divya. Sorry to interrupt you there. But we've got some discussion just after Sarah has spoken, so you can definitely conclude over there again. Sorry, Divya, I keep pronouncing your name wrong. I apologize. Let's just go to Sarah now. Sarah, are you there? Would you like to share your screen? Divya, you can unshare.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so morning, everyone. As Yolandi's indicated, my name's Sarah, and I'm a PhD candidate at the CSSR. And what I'm going to be presenting on today is part of a larger team project that we've been working on around youth sexuality empowerment programs. And my specific aspect of the program has been the development of the toolkit. So that's what we're going to be looking at during the presentation. So we'll be looking at the current version of the Masisi-Kovise toolkit, which takes its name from the isiXhosa word meaning let us empower ourselves. So this is a program refinement toolkit that can be used to design new programs or to evaluate or adapt existing programs. So what I'm going to do today is start by providing some context for the development of the toolkit with particular reference to the concept of empowerment. And then I'll also provide an overview of the critical sexual and reproductive citizenship framework, which is what the toolkit is based on. We'll then look at the principles of the framework in more detail, particularly how those have been operationalized in the current version of the toolkit. And then what I'll also do is to provide some illustrative examples of how these principles can be incorporated into programs, just to try and make some links between theory and practice. Before we get started on that, on the ins and outs of the toolkit itself, I just want to highlight the collaborative aspects of this project. So Partners in Sexual Health, who will also be presenting later today, and the CSSR are working in partnership to develop the toolkit. So the current version of the toolkit, which is a draft version, has been developed by myself and Katrina McLeod, with input from members of the CSSR, including Tabila Matwetwa and Chanel Delquazil, who are also working on aspects of the broader team project. So our next step is to present the toolkit to Partners in Sexual Health for their feedback and recommendations, and then further amendments will be made. So that's where we're currently at. All right, so just to provide some context for why we feel the toolkit and the theoretical framework it's based on is useful for sexuality education, I just want to note a couple of points, some of which Divya has already touched on in her presentation. So, you know, there is a general recognition that sexuality education is kind of recognized as important, but there are various shortcomings that have been noted. Some of which are, for example, an emphasis on danger, damage, and disease, a focus on knowledge provision and behavioral change that doesn't account for contextual issues. There's also generally an ahistoric and individualistic focus, a re-inscription of inequalities related to various social identities, you know, for example, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability status, age, geographic location, religious beliefs, and so on. The list is potentially endless. Although there's also the construction of youth as vulnerable and in need of protection, something that Divya has spoken about, or alternatively also as irresponsible and hypersexual. So these two dual sort of constructions of youth and sometimes competing constructions of youth. There's also, scholars have noted, a general prioritization of cisgender male sexual pleasure over that of other gender identities, and a focus on heterosexual and cisgender people's experiences of sexual and reproductive health, kind of invisibilizing of queer and transsexual identities. So one proposed solution to these issues is to adopt an empowerment approach to sexuality education. So if we look a little bit at what an empowerment approach offers, you know, broadly, in a broad sense, empowerment refers to a kind of state of being empowered to do something, you know, having the power or the right or the authority to take certain actions. Theoretically speaking, and in a more academic sense, empowerment can be conceptualized in a number of ways. But what we're advocating for here with the toolkit is a conceptualization of empowerment as an ongoing and iterative process, which is enabled by the interplay of three components. So in particular, the intrapersonal or individual component, the interpersonal or collective component, and the behavioral or action-orientated component. So what a lot of scholars have noted is that in terms of sexuality education, there is a tendency to equate empowerment with individualized concepts such as self-efficacy and agency. So the focus is placed on the intrapersonal or individualistic component of empowerment, and the other aspects of empowerment, the collective and the action-orientated, are often neglected. So what an individualized understanding of empowerment tends to do is identify individuals rather than social conditions as the key problem, quote unquote, to be resolved. So what this also tends to do is undermine the social justice aspects of empowerment. So kind of in light of these critiques, there have been calls to adopt a broader, more integrative conceptualization of empowerment with a key focus on acknowledging the role played by context. So in response to this, McLeod and Vincent, who conceptualized the framework on which the toolkit is based, have argued for the adoption of a critical sexual and reproductive citizenship approach to sexuality education. So I just want to discuss a little bit about what this framework details. It basically is an approach which falls within the broad domain of empowerment, but its primary aim is to empower youth to claim their status as citizens entitled to sexual and reproductive rights. So it attempts to foreground the social justice aspects of empowerment, with individual efficacy and agency forming part of the overall discussion, but not being the central focus. So I just want to make a note here that the term citizenship within this framework doesn't refer to our kind of traditional understandings of citizenship, in the sense that citizenship is not understood as a status that is conferred through birth or naturalization. Instead, the framework aligns itself with the view that sexual and reproductive rights are human rights, universal human rights, and therefore citizenship status or our status as citizenships or our inclusion in certain entitlements should take precedence over local or regional or national laws. So what this framework does is it draws on the work of feminist, queer and disability scholars and seeks to expand citizenship to include a broader spectrum of rights and embed these rights within an understanding of social justice. The toolkit embraces a number of rights related to sexual and reproductive health, and those are conduct-based rights, identity-based rights, and relationship-based rights. So what we're talking about in terms of conduct-based rights are these are the types of rights that focus on what we refer to as ethical sexual practices in personal relationships. So these might be, for example, the right to sexual pleasure or rights of bodily control. In terms of identity-based rights, these are the kinds of rights which focus on sexual self-definition and the development of individual and multiple sexual identities. So, for example, one right might be the right to public recognition of multiple sexual identities, multiple and varied, we could say. Then in terms of relationship-based rights, what the framework is referring to there is rights which focus on public validation of various forms of sexual relationships. And this might include a number of rights, but one example would be the right to consent to sexual behaviors, as one example. Okay, so the original framework that sort of outlined in the key chapter on which toolkit is based, McLeod and Vincent's chapter, initially outlined 5 key principles that could be incorporated into sexuality education programs. So that would be citizenship as status and practice, situated agency, differentiated universalism, the interweaving of the private and the public, and finally, the politics of recognition, redistribution, and reparation. So now, during the development of the toolkit, we've adapted these initial principles very slightly. Namely, the principle of citizenship as status and practice was separated into 2 interrelated but distinct principles. And an additional principle, principle 7, that of inclusive and process-based pedagogical processes was added. So that's theoretical, a broad overview of the theoretical framework. Now we look at the toolkit itself, just to give you a general overview of what it currently looks like. I want to give you a general overall view of the structure of the toolkit. So currently it contains 7 tools, which include a program design guide, individual interview guides for program facilitators or program participants, focus group guides for program facilitators or program participants, as well as an observation guide and a manual and textual analysis guide. So how the toolkit is structured is it contains guiding questions that can be used in, as I've mentioned, either the design of a new program or evaluate or adapt existing programs. So tool A would be a program design guide. The remainder of these tools B to G would be for the purposes of evaluating an existing program. So as an evaluation tool, the programs can be obviously assessed using these range of tools, depending on the context and the mode of program delivery. The toolkit has designed specifically to be flexible, and all the tools can be altered depending on context. So what I want to highlight particularly is that the toolkit is meant as a formative tool that assists in the process of improving programs. It's not a summative tool in which programs are evaluated as having reached particular goals. Also, for anyone who may be interested, the toolkit, when it's finalized, will be published under Creative Commons, which means that users may adapt the toolkit to fit their own purposes, although giving credit to the originators. So that's the overview, the general overview of what the toolkit currently looks like and the various tools that are contained in the toolkit. All right, so what I want to do for the remainder and the bulk of our time is to look at the toolkit itself and specifically the principles of the framework in more detail. So I'm going to provide a general overview of each of the 7 principles contained in the toolkit, providing some illustrative examples of each principle. Now, what I've done is base these examples on a hypothetical sexuality education program focusing on abortion and related sexual and reproductive health matters. So I'm hoping that these examples will give you a sense of how the principles can hypothetically be incorporated into programs. And then finally, what I'm going to do is review the guiding questions that have been developed for each principle. So these questions basically serve as the kind of backbone for each tool contained in the toolkit. And they can be viewed either as design questions or as research questions that underpin a formative evaluation. Okay. So if we look at principle 1, citizenship as status, basically what we're referring to here is the idea of belonging and inclusion or exclusion from entitlements inherent in belonging. And what we mean by belonging is really the capacity to take up rights. So how this principle would be incorporated into programs essentially involves some kind of exploration of the kinds of sexual and reproductive rights youth are entitled to. So at a basic level, this requires access to information about entitlements and rights, but at a deeper level, it calls for kind of questioning who gets to belong and why. Who is included or excluded in legislation? What kind of barriers exist in terms of access to services? Who experiences these barriers most acutely? What are the social dynamics that underpin these exclusions? So the kinds of questioning that you want to do in terms of this principle is to really extend also those questions to who has the power to decide about belonging and why. So if we apply this principle kind of to our example, what a hypothetical program could do, if it's focusing, for example, on abortion, is detail the World Health Organization's emphasis on safe abortion and look at the stipulations of the CTOP Act, including the right of minors to access abortion without parental consent. It could emphasize abortion as an issue of bodily integrity, so therefore, drawing on conduct-based rights. And again, those are the kinds of rights that focus on ethical sexual practices and personal relationships. Could also include discussion around bodily integrity and access to abortion for transgender men and gender diverse people, therefore linking it to identity-based rights, which again focus on the idea of sexual self-definition and the development of sexual identities. It could also initiate some dialogue about the complexities of abortion decision-making and consent within the context of intimate relationships, therefore drawing on relationship-based rights. And it would also speak through barriers to accessing services, this capacity to take up rights, including kind of structural and social issues. So it would look at distances to clinics or issues around abortion stigma. So in relation to this principle, what the toolkit poses is the following questions. What sexual and reproductive rights are referred to in the program? How is belonging or capacity to take up these rights dealt with in the program? What international, regional, or national frameworks, laws, and policies are referred to in the program? What conduct-based rights, identity-based rights, and relationship-based rights are referred to in the program? How is the role of local contexts in terms of facilitating inclusion and or exclusion from critical sexual and reproductive citizenship referred to in the program? How is the role of individual contexts in terms of facilitating inclusion and or exclusion referred to in the program? So that's a general overview of Principle 1. If we look at Principle 2, citizenship as status, very much linked, citizenship as practice, very much linked to Principle 1, which is citizenship status. So citizenship status is linked to concerns related to quote unquote citizenship as practice, essentially meaning that formal and informal political participation may feed into both local improvements and more macro developments such as legislative changing. So the citizenship status and citizenship practice work together in kind of navigating these parameters. So discussion concerning actions that extend or restrict inclusion and belonging, and again, so belonging is the capacity to take up rights, and the forms of political participation that can be undertaken in order to sort of access rights or facilitate inclusion and belonging would be the focus of this principle. So I also want to note here that the kind of youth participation in NGO-run programs, such as those that we'll be discussing or we'll be hearing from later, is an important example of informal political action. So if we apply this example, if we apply this principle to the example, our hypothetical program, it could do the following. It could outline the formal political processes that went into the passing of the CTOP Act. It could discuss the implications of legal challenges to the Act. It could, debate the local actions that were taken to overcome, to the extent that it's possible, barriers to access, access to abortion that has been identified by participants. So, in relation to this particular principle, the toolkit poses the following questions. What forms of political participation around sexual and reproductive rights and legislation are spoken about in the program? What forms of formal political action are spoken about? And what forms of informal political action are spoken about in the program? if we look at principle 3, differentiated universalism, basically this essentially calls for a recognition that exclusion from citizenship is a reality for marginalized groups. So, for example, legislation and policies may promise equal and fair access, but particular people remain excluded from accessing sexual and reproductive services. Potentially when they access those services, it's an unsafe space. So whilst we also need to recognize exclusion of marginalized groups, we need to be aware that we do also run the risk of homogenizing those same groups. So I think it's important to emphasize that what this principle is talking about, and the emphasis of the word differentiated calls for an intersectional understanding of marginalization. So if we apply this principle to the example, our hypothetical example, it could emphasize the internationally recognized or cross-cutting right to access safe abortion under the legal conditions enabled in a country. It can also discuss how access may be denied within a particular community, for example, through lack of knowledge about legal entitlements or lack of knowledge around where services are located. Can also talk about, for example, local beliefs about women's reproductive roles and how that might hinder access to certain services. It could also question how within communities, particular people, so for example, maybe people living with disabilities or HIV or poor women or gender diverse people may be more affected than others in terms of denial of services. So again, what the toolkit poses in relation to this principle are the following guiding questions. How are cross-cutting issues in relation to sexual and reproductive issues balanced with contextual nuances within the program? Which sexual and reproductive health principles are identified as cross-cutting in the program? What contextual issues are raised in relation to cross-cutting sexual and reproductive health issues in the program? And finally, how are differences and similarities across and within groups affected by the sexual and reproductive health issue under discussion dealt with? Okay, looking at principle 4, the interweaving of the private and the public, the toolkit framework kind of necessitates an examination of the gendered separation of public and private spheres. So in the sense that the quote unquote public represents or generally represents kind of masculinist notions of universalism, justice, and independence, and the quote unquote private represents what we might term more feminized notions of particularity, care, and dependence or interdependence. So it's important for programs to recognize how the kind of public-private binary is socially and politically constructed, but also how the spheres are interwoven and how the kind of interaction between the public and the private impacts citizenship for differentiated groups. So looking at our hypothetical program, it could, for example, examine how responsibility for contraceptive use needed to prevent unwanted pregnancy is mostly assigned to heterosexual cisgender women, and how this private responsibility is directly related to access to health systems which are located in the public domain and which are largely dominated by men. It could also examine how contraceptive use and access is underpinned by various factors, for example, poverty, gendered power relations, geographic location, and each of these kind of factors are experienced personally, but are generated publicly. It could also discuss, for example, how intimate partner relations pertain to contraceptive decision-making and negotiation, how those kind of power relations influence contraceptive decision-making and the negotiation process around contraception. So if we look at the toolkit's guiding questions around Principle 4, poses the following. How does the program deal with power relations, i.e. the public, in relation to individual decision-making and agency, i.e. the private? How does the program deal with power relations and social challenges related to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability status, age, geographic location, and/or religious beliefs? And finally, how is individual decision-making and responsibility dealt with in relation to gendered power relations? Okay, then moving to Principle 5, citizenship and situated agency. So basically, this principle calls for understanding agency not as autonomous, but as situated. So in other words, agency operates within particular contexts. So, for example, those in situations of privilege are able to kind of draw on certain resources to facilitate their actions or their engagement in inclusion and belonging, or their capacity to take up rights. So just want to caution here again, much like differentiated universalism, an understanding of situated agency shouldn't suggest that people in marginalized situations are without agency. We need to also recognize that those in marginalized groups are able to navigate ways to facilitate inclusion and belonging, even if that inclusion and belonging is limited. So you need to kind of balance these two ideas within the principle. So if we apply it to our hypothetical program, it can look at things like privilege and marginalization. So, looking at, who is and who is not able to take up entitlements, or whose entitlements or ability to take up entitlements is limited. And we can look at that in relation to kind of, for example, key reproductive justice principles. So the right to have children, the right to not have children, the right to raise children in a healthy and supportive environment. It could also discuss personal and collective actions that can extend entitlements to marginalized populations. So, for example, pregnant women with disabilities insisting on proper antenatal care or respectful treatment at abortion clinics, or local initiatives to provide quality day care for working parents. So in relation to this principle, we pose the following questions. How are situations of privilege in relation to inclusion, entitlement, and belonging dealt with in the program? How are situations of marginalization in relation to inclusion, entitlement, and belonging dealt with in the program? What agentic practices are advocated to overcome situations of marginalization? How actionable are these agentic practices within local contexts? And just to give some kind of clarifying information here, what we're meaning by agentic practices is basically practices that facilitate our ability to claim citizenship. All right, so principle 6, the politics of recognition, redistribution, and reparation. So basically, this principle is calling for programs to incorporate a kind of interwoven understanding of the politics of recognition and of redistribution. So recognition generally encourages, again, belonging and inclusion, but with the understanding that belonging is worthless if the resources to enact it are missing. Where the politics of recognition or redistribution fail, the politics of reparation are then invoked, meaning that legal, healthcare, and social reparations are made where harm has been caused. So our hypothetical program could do the following, could speak about recognizing everyone, including marginalized groups such as sex workers, drug users, refugees, to name a few, as legitimate users of abortion services. It could provide examples of harm. So, for example, the kind of harm caused by unequal distribution of economic and social resources. So, for example, people being turned away from abortion clinics that are under-resourced and overstretched. It could also discuss the kinds of reparations that participants see as necessary. So this might be a symbolic or material reparations. So, symbolic reparations might be clinics taking steps to overtly welcome marginalized populations, or more material gestures might be, advocating for adequate abortion services across the board. So what the toolkit poses in relation to this principle is, how are the politics of recognition referred to in the program? What sexual, gender, and reproductive identities are recognized in the program? How are these identities referred to in relation to access to sexual and reproductive health and rights? And how are the politics of redistribution referred to in the program? How are the politics of reparation referred to in the program? And for what sexual and reproductive issues are reparations seen as necessary? Okay, then moving on to our final principle. See that I'm a little over time, but we'll be wrapping up very shortly. Principle 7, which is inclusive and process-based pedagogical processes. So generally what this kind of principle is referring to is that the framework seeks to promote kind of process-based understandings of sexual and reproductive citizenship. And so it's advocating for a kind of critical pedagogy to be adopted within programs. So in the sense, the final principle just really generally encourages an approach that seeks to explore and challenge power relations and marginalization in complex and nuanced ways. So a hypothetical program would focus on, for example, a pedagogical practice that requires participation and, very importantly, dialogue. And again, very importantly, between what we refer to as educators as learners, linking to kind of, I think, what Divya was saying previously, we need to be listening to what young people are saying and what they already know, and also learners as educators. Again, thinking to what Divya has said, educators as learners and learners as educators. So in relation to this principle, the toolkit poses the following questions. What pedagogical processes are used in the program to facilitate understandings of critical and sexual reproductive citizenship? How are the strengths and challenges of these pedagogical processes able to foster inclusive and process-based understandings of critical sexual and reproductive citizenship in the program? So that's the final principle. So just to very quickly conclude, I think that we believe the development of the toolkit is in line with calls for critical citizenship education, in which the notions of power, voice, and difference are central. So it's our hope that the toolkit will contribute to this project in the domain of sexual and reproductive public health, in which critical citizenship education has, for the most part, been very lacking. All right, that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was lovely. We've got about 20 minutes left to have a discussion. And I reckon I'd just let you guys go over time because we've got a nice long discussion time in the end. So anyone who would like to ask questions, I've got a few here that's been in the chat, so I thought I'd just speak them out here. Deirdre Blackie says, in my experience, many of the sugar daddy relationships are negotiated by parents and guardians. Most girls note that they are unable to negotiate contraceptives and condoms, condom use in these relationships. And Beryl agrees. They also find that being the case when speaking to many of the young people that they work with. I think this is kind of addressed to Divya. Divya, would you like to make a comment on this?
Sure. Of course, that's the case. These are unequal relations, age relations, and of course, the vulnerability in relation to poverty. The issue that I described in suggesting what might it take for us to intervene in ways that don't suggest cautioning against sugar daddies, but recognizing exactly that point and providing alternate intervention strategies that might still safeguard girls even in these relationships.
Thank you, Divya. If anyone has a question, please just put their hand up. I think it's just underneath the participant list. You have the option of putting your hand up. But in the meantime, Nix McLean said, blocking access to technologies or platforms ignores agency and ability to access content in alternative ways, for instance, VPNs. Emphasis should rather be on digital security skills as an ethic of care that respects agency and creates the space for digital skills and knowledge building and navigating tech. Nix, if you want to add to that, you're welcome. And I think that was also addressed to Divya.
Yeah, thanks, Yolandi. No, I was just commenting on essentially how quickly the kind of go-to is to block technology or see technology as something that, you know, must be dealt with and policed immediately. It becomes an issue around regulation. And completely ignores how people are able to access technology in different ways. You know, we've seen that with students, for instance, in accessing journals. If they can't get it through the usual means, they have their, what I would call an alternative socialist library option. So that was just really a comment there in terms of that, and thinking rather around, so the work I'm doing at the moment around feminist internet research, we're looking at digital security as an act of care. And I think that would be a far more productive space, for instance, that instead of blocking technologies, really just looking at how we can introduce people to the skills needed to navigate those technologies. So that's what the comment was about.
Thanks, Nick. Divya, Sarah, do any of you want to just contribute to that comment?
The point that I was making here was that exactly the point about a misrecognition of the sophisticated ability of young people to access through VPN but also beyond that, the attempt, even as I mean, I like this digital security as an act of care. However, even the notion that sex, sexuality, and porn are restricted to some hardcore sites fails to recognize the intensity through which sex and sexuality are produced in everyday life.
Thank you. Kerry, you made a comment, but I'm going to let you just say it for yourself. You can unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to say the comment I made, Sarah answered, and I was really very, actually quite moved and excited about it. It's the first time I've really heard the concepts of queer people, relationship diversity, and diverse sexualities being incorporated so thoroughly, almost foregrounded. So that's what I was like really wanting to know, is how did we define gender? Because I think we can be quite limited, and it actually, in a lot of ways, even when we have good intentions, that we reinforce that binary and everything that comes with the gender binary. So thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Perfect. Sarah or Divya, would you like to respond?
Oh, just to say, like, thank you, Kerry, for that feedback. I think, you know, it is one of the things that we are attempting to, you know, attempting to ensure that the tools. I was putting my lights on. My apartment is very dark, but now I feel that we're attempting to, you know, keep doing that kind of work of coming back and trying to ensure as much inclusivity as we can. And I think trying to foreground kind of, you know, queer voices or queer concerns, if you can refer to that, of trans people, you know, kind of trying to ensure that we really engage with a kind of intersectional lens when it comes to sexuality education. So thank you for the comment.
And it is at this point that I want to apologize for going way beyond my allocated time, precisely because there's just so much to say. And, you know, it would require a whole lot of time and conversation around gender and sexual diversity. And I am so glad that it is being considered more deeply. And the work that we're doing here is addressing precisely these gaps. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Susan, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'd just like to say thank you to both presenters and to you for hosting and for presenting and hosting. I love the toolkit. I think it's amazing. I think it's opening up, as someone else was saying, it's generative. Tanya was saying it's generative and inspiring. It is. It's very encompassing. I have a question, and which I'm sure will be actually answered more by the later session, the later presentation and discussion, in relation to who actually manages the toolkit. Because, you know, they always say, I don't even know what it is. I remember when we used to do those old days, this old gender training, when we still used to speak about sex and gender and all those things. I'm sure everyone's rolling their eyes if you can remember that. But some of us used to start with putting up a drawing of a penknife, or not a penknife, a Swiss Army knife, and saying that this thing can do many things. It's a tool. It can protect you, it can feed you, and it can also harm and hurt you. And I think all toolkits have that possibility in relation to who actually uses it. And so I haven't seen it a lot. I haven't, apart from what you've shared now, but my constant question was around, we use big words and concepts and big ideas, which in your presentation, Sarah, you unpacked very well and made it very concrete, and it was very clear. So who gets to use the toolkit, and what processes of support and discussion and shared kind of, I suppose the point I'm trying to make in a kind of is, how do you prepare people to actually use the toolkit in the way that envisions the actual principles that it embodies, rather than, it's limited, I suppose, by who runs it, who manages the toolkit. And so sometimes those big words, I was like, it sounds pretty, it sounds wonderful, but there's that worry when we use these big words. And I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but so how's that tension? I'm sure you guys have thought about it. You thought about absolutely everything in terms of how you actually framed it, and it's beautiful. But in terms of the actual implementation and the use of it and operationalization of it, in terms of, because it's going to be in the hands of everyone. This might sound like an arrogant question, but I'm hoping that the intention of my question is clear.
Thanks, Susan. I think you've made some really good comments, and I think it's what you're kind of vocalizing is some of the conversations we've been having kind of throughout this process of developing it. I mean, this current draft is kind of, I think, now in its 4th version. And each time we're sort of trying to come back and be like, well, you know, a lot of times I feel that academic language is really inaccessible. And so this kind of work of trying to get to the kind of bones of what we're trying to say, as opposed to kind of the real kind of lot of academic wording, which, you know, I just feel like is kind of can be off-putting and difficult to kind of get to the kind of central idea. And I think in that sense, what we were really hoping is, and I think one of the real importances of the kind of collaborative aspect of the project is that we are as readers that are coming to this kind of project with a certain kind of knowledge, and partners in sexual health are coming to the kind of project with a real kind of practical application of, we are running programs, we understand what is needed kind of on the ground. So I think hopefully what we will find throughout this process, that this is the initial draft. When we take it to partners in sexual health, I think they're going to come to us and say this exact kind of thing that you're saying. How can we unpack this more? How can we make this more accessible to kind of what we are doing in our programs on a day-to-day kind of level? And so I think that's kind of going to be an ongoing process of developing the toolkit. I imagine that, you know, once we kind of workshop it with them, there are going to be several further revisions to kind of do the kind of work that you're referencing, where it's like, well, what do these things mean? I can't necessarily be kind of going on the ground when we're having discussions with every NGO that wants to utilize the toolkit. The question that you're making, and the question that you're kind of asking in terms of, you know, who manages it, I think, I don't know, Katrina, I think if you have any thoughts, but I don't know if we've really gotten to think of that kind of question yet, and so I'm glad that you've posed it. I think the general idea was that we would publish it under Creative Commons and that anyone who would want to utilize it can utilize it. But I think you're bringing in an important question here of, you know, kind of, do we need to do some more, I don't know, bridging work of providing perhaps training on the utilization of the toolkit, or some kind of resource that people can access where we speak through the various aspects of the toolkit. I don't know, Katrina, if you have any thoughts that you want to add.
No, I thanks, and I think it's a very valid question, and one that we, you know, do need to think of. I mean, part of the in a sense why this is taking so long to develop is because we're doing a sort of slow, careful process, trying to think through the various oh, okay. Sorry, she says start my video. Just to talk through the various, you know, the various nuances, the various complexities, the various ways in which things can be unclear, or they can be clear, or they can be useful, or they can be constructive, or whatever. I suppose in the end, our idea is to make this freely available to whomever it is useful for. But I can see the point of that people could possibly take it and use it in ways that are perhaps inimical to the kind of principles of it. And so then it's contingent on us to make those perfectly clear and to make them absolutely yeah, just exactly what they mean and how they can and cannot be used. I'm not sure that you know, with the way that we have sort of structured it, that you could use it in ways that are completely opposite to, you know, the intention of the tool. And, you know, really any feedback that anybody wishes to give us on what you've seen in the presentation or anything else, it would be really valuable, because we really are in the kind of development phase and wish to get it right. So all feedback is very much welcomed. Thanks.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think perhaps we should stop it there and then have our little break. I've got some interesting questions from Deirdre in the chat, and I was thinking perhaps you can just hold on to them until the final discussion at 12. And then I'll see everyone again here at 11, when we will start off with Nelly Siwe and hear about the NGO programs. Thank you so much, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone is back and I hope everyone can hear me. We will now start our second session with our NGOs. And we will start with Nelisiwe from Seoul City. Nelisiwe, you can go ahead and present.
Thank you, Ulanda, and good morning to everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. We just wanted to be part of it so that we can share what we have learned over the years around youth sexuality empowerment programs. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to engaging later. I think if you can see my screen, you see welcome to Seoul City. So I chose this picture because for me, it represents the communities where we work, where we implement our programs. But in reality, we took this photo as we were driving out of Gauteng towards Northwest, and there is an informal community, and they've named themselves Seoul City. So I just thought this was quite important as a background. And before maybe I can even start with my presentation, I think it's also important that when we look at youth sexuality empowerment programs, we don't talk about it out of context. We still need to acknowledge the social, economic context of where the young people are, and and implement the programs with an understanding that the context are different. I think the first speaker, Bina, also highlighted that issue. So just briefly, I want to just go through my presentation.
Nelisiwe, I think you might have muted yourself.
Okay, but I'm also trying to get to my next slide. And it's not allowing me.
So go to the bottom left corner of your screen. You'll see something come up that says forward. Yes, that one is back. Just the one next to it.
There we go. Yeah, just a background of who we are as Seoul City. I think most people will know us because for the past 20 years, we've been health and development communications organization. But in the past 4 years, we have rebranded ourselves and we are now called Seoul City Institute for Social Justice. What does that mean is that we are an intersectional feminist organization committed to social justice. And our focus in terms of our programs is adolescent girls and young women. And we exist as an organization to address issues of gender inequality, specifically dismantling of patriarchy and ensuring that women enjoy their rights in the society. And like I've mentioned earlier, for more than 2 decades, Seoul City, we have been pioneering work around social behavioral change communications. So most of people still know Seoul City as a pioneer in terms of our television show that we ran over years, but also we had a children's program called Soul Buddies program that we were flighting on television, which was really meant to educate and raise awareness on various issues, including, HIV prevention, including gender-based violence in South African communities. These are just our alignment in terms of strategy. We are part of the, aligned to Agenda 2030. We are linked to the South African Constitution in terms of human rights, the rights to bodily integrity and autonomy, promoting the provision of rights of young women and girls, and then we are part of the SEDEC protocol. Most of you might ask yourselves, why is Seoul City focusing specifically on adolescent girls and young women? I think before I even get to what is on the slides, we are aware that the reality is that most affected people in terms of gender-based violence, but just in terms of other social problems like your teenage pregnancy, adolescent girls are the most affected. The stats that was released last month, just in Gauteng, I think we had about 934 girls between the ages of 10 and 14 who gave birth in the facilities. But also if you're looking at the new infections, adolescent girls and young women are on the high. I think it was 1,300 infections that happened on a daily basis. So hence our focus as an organization has been on adolescent girls and young women. So the prevalence in terms of HIV new infections, the 15 to 24-year-olds, they account 37% of the new infections. If you will looking at the workforce and just people who are in unemployment, mostly are Black women. And the number of young women 10 to 19, I think I've already mentioned that is on an increase. I guess we cannot run away as a country that we have high rate of gender and sexual violence, and girls in this age group are the most affected. If you look at the rape statistics are high, 92.6 with the 10 to 19-year-olds and 91.7% to 20 to 29-year-olds. And then older women are also affected. I guess the unemployment rate, and we have, as I have indicated, young women are the most affected as well. So how do we, approach our programs in terms of implementing the programs that we are implementing? Our main guiding principles is to ensure that in our programs, young women and the people that we engage with, have self-determination, and we're focusing on their well-being. When you're saying well-being, we're looking at holistically, emotionally, physically, sexual, and their emotional well-being. We also guided by intersectionality. We realize that women are affected because of gender inequalities, but we are also understanding that, the educational background, the socioeconomic background of where the women are, there are differences. So, for example, a young woman in Soweto might have different experiences from a young woman who is in Kwamapumulo in KZN, in deep rural KZN, or in the Eastern Cape. So we need to also to look at those differences and how our programs must be aligned to, to the context of where the women are. So, and one of our other guiding principles is making sure that young women, we build a movement for young women where we create a platform. You will see later as I discuss one of our programs. We believe that women need to have that safe space where they can engage with each other, obviously with support through material and share information, share experiences around the issues that affect them as young women. So our methodologies, how we do our work, we're still big on mass media, but we've also looking at social media to raise awareness, to messages around different issues that affect young women. We're also looking at advocacy. We believe that for some of the changes to happen, we need to ensure that the context or the policy is in place, or the policy, even if a policy is in place, it's being implemented so that young women can enjoy safety and the services that they require. And we believe that our other methodology that we're using is that we mobilize communities We give them information, we share the materials with them, but a big part of our work is what can you do about it as a community or as young women. So we also empower them with tools on how to take up some of the issues and organize themselves so that they can also address at community level, issues that affect them. So if there is a local clinic where they know that they're supposed to be getting contraceptives or have access to contraceptives, if the clinic doesn't treat them with dignity or there is not adolescent and youth friendly, what can they do? So part of the social mobilization is also to empower your young women to have a voice and be able to address some of the gaps that they experience in accessing some of the services. So just the programs that we have in terms of youth empowerment programs, which include sexuality. We've got a program that we call Soul Buddies Club. If you know Seoul City, we used to have a television series called Soul Buddies. From that television series, we then had young people or children writing to Seoul City saying they also want to start their own soul buddies. Basically, the television program was showcasing in a school setting a group of children who will come together during break after school, and they will discuss issues that affect them. And the issues differs from bullying to body changes, what happens when their bodies were changing as they were getting into puberty. So the program we have been implementing since 2004, we are in partnership with the Department of Education, and currently Seoul City is not directly implementing the program, but we are now handed over the program to be implemented at school through the Department of Education, and Seoul City provide technical support. But how the program works is that we work with boys and girls ages 8 to 14. We train an educator who we call our Soul Buddies Club facilitator. We provide them with the material, some of the guide, unit guide, we call it a unit guide, and they engage with the children, with different activities. A big component of the Soul Buddies Club is that we train that educator who will run the program out after school or during break or when they have a free time. So a big component of our work in terms of even talking about sexuality is that we prepare the teachers to be comfortable to talk about, sexuality themselves. So one of the things that, one of the activities that we do with the teachers is to help them to be comfortable talking about sexuality themselves so that it's easier when they then engage with the children. Unfortunately, a lot of our teachers are part of our broader society in South Africa. There's still taboos around talking about sexuality. So it was very important for us that we take them through a training so that they feel comfortable to talk about difficult issues so that they're able to help the children that are part of the program. So that's a program that we're running in primary schools, and mainly it's focusing on the pre-teen information. So I'm 9, I'm 8, I'm 11, my body's starting to change. What does it mean? And what we have found over the years is that this program has been very helpful in helping the children understand their sexuality or as they grow to become teens or pre-teens, because they don't get the information at home. So you find that, it does give them information that they will understand their growth and sexuality, because parents have not been really, if you talk to young children and young people in generally, they will say, my mother never talked to me about sexuality, or whether I'm going to start with my menstruation, there's still a taboo around, parents engaging children on sexuality. So we believe with such programs, they strengthen what is being done at school level with your life skills or life orientation program. It strengthens those programs, but also with the current comprehensive sexuality education, because it's a classroom-based program. The Soul Bodies Club program then becomes, an out of class, and children have more time and they are more free to engage, to discuss and ask questions about sexuality issues. And then another program that we are running is the high school intervention, or the 15 to 19, and then the out of school 20 to 24-year-olds, which we call it the Rise Young Women's Club. It's specifically for young women. We're creating a platform where they can meet as a club or as a group of young women. Normally in the club, you'll have 10 to 15 members. What we do as a Soul City, we've got field workers who work with the clubs, who provide support, mentoring, but the group themselves are run by young women and they discuss a range of issues that affect them. So a big component of our work, if you look at it, is also mentoring the young women, mentoring the boys that are part of the Soul Bodies Club program in understanding issues that affect them. This is just how we implement in terms of provinces. We are in all the 9 provinces. We've got a program officer, we've got the clubs, and then we've got your social mobilizers, which we call also called field workers, who support the clubs. Our work in terms of both Soul Bodies Club and the Rise Clubs are also aligned with the current programs in the country. So they are not outside of your integrated school health program. If you look at the Soul Bodies Club, for example, it's aligned with the Department of Health integrated school health program. The different topics that we cover in the curriculum, are linked to the Department of Education's care for teaching and for learning and teaching and support, its rights-based approach, and also looking at community advocacy, where we're saying young women need also to have a voice and to advocate for their rights, to ensure that they access the services that they provide. So in terms of the curriculum that we cover in both Soul Bodies Club and in the Rise Young Women's Clubs, we look at personal and environmental hygiene, look at nutrition. For both Rise, we're also looking at abuse, issue of sexual violence, sexual reproductive health, menstrual health. We look at contraceptives, STIs, HIV prevention, and also looking at the other services that are available, looking at mental health issues, drug and substance abuse. As I said earlier on, if you're looking at youth empowerment programs, you cannot just, not look at other issues that affect a young woman in their context. This is just wanted to share some of because Soul Bodies Club has been running for quite some time. We have done some research where we were looking at the impact of the program. Does it make an impact? So we compared young people who were part of Soul Bodies when they were in primary school. Now they are adults. Some of them were at tertiary institution, to just look at, are there any differences? So to our, in terms of our findings, we did it in 2016. We realized that, the program had a positive impact in terms of when we look at our ex-buddies that participated in the study, is that most of them were completed their matric. They were engaging in safer sexual behaviors. They were most likely to use condom in terms of when they engaged, and they will delay their sexual debut. And during the study, we also tested at the end, we asked the participants if we could do an HIV test, and we found that female ex-buddies were 3 times more likely to be HIV negative. So those are some of the findings that we have, found. We have come up with, but also looking at community engagement. We also realize that being part of the program help the participants to participate in community activities. You will find that even though they're finished or they're out of their community, during holidays, they will come back and participate in community activities. I think this is because of our key principle with our program, is that once we have given young people or the children information about any particular subject, we also call them for action. So now that you know about bullying, you know about sexuality, they will then form themselves groups where they will go from class to class and educate other young people, and they become sort of peer educators in schools. And studies have shown that engaging on in sexual education, when it's done by other peers, they listen to each other. But it's important that when they go out and do peer support, they themselves are empowered. They've got enough information, they've got enough knowledge to be able to, then share the information with the other learners. So that's why for us as Seoul City, it's very important that we provide the materials that they will use as a reference when they do peer support or peer awareness programs within their schools. I'll just skip this one. Specifically the RISE program, I want to just maybe give more information on it, is that it's your high school but out of school program. So it's 15 to 19-year-olds who are still in school, and we also run the 20 to 24-year-olds who are out of school. Our big message with this program is young women having a space where as a group they can discuss issues that affect them. And although as an organization, we know our key objectives is around HIV prevention, teenage pregnancy, but also sexuality education, we look at other issues that affect them, like your gender-based violence, mobilizing them to have a voice when they see that there are gaps in service delivery. So the program is really about giving young women that space to share and discuss issues that affect them as young women. And we found, and the feedback that we have received from the groups or the young women that participate in the program is that through this program, they are able to get more information that they will not get from their parents, but with the support as well that we give them through the materials, they are able to get important information. Part of the work that they will do during their club meetings is not just looking at, HIV prevention messages or teenage pregnancy prevention. They also look at other issues that affect them as young women. For example, they will share scholarships that are available when they want to apply or further their careers. Those who are out of school, they will share those who want to be employed, employment opportunities. And that builds like a social cohesion amongst young women, and it gives them the support, which most of them have said they don't get that support in their own homes or generally with their friends. And this program provides them with that space, that safe space where they can engage freely. So the club itself becomes a safe space where they can also share their experiences. So some of them have shared that maybe they've had trauma experiences like rape, and then they're able to refer each other to services that deal with GBV and refer them for counseling and for further support. What we are looking at in Seoul City going forward is how do we engage the parents? Because some of the work that we are doing in a club, we cannot ignore the fact that the young women, they are part of families, they are part of communities. So it's for us to also ensure that we engage the parents, even if it's just once every quarter, just to discuss with them basic communication skills. because a lot of young women have come up to say, you know, my relationship with my mother is not good, we don't communicate. So it was quite important that at least, even if it's not on a weekly basis, we do have some programs that also involve the parents, but also look at the community structures that are available to support young women as well. I'm just gonna move. So basically what we want to see at the end through this program is that we want to see young women who are empowered, who are healthy, but who are also self-actualized. And we want to have, you know, have young women who are able to have healthy relationships, you know, improve self-esteem in the key areas of their lives, learning about themselves and to better communicate, that through the program they will feel supported, and that they are able to address, you know, challenges that they face as young women, and also to, you know, be able to have a voice even in their relationships, you know, as they go to communities. One of the things that we have also picked up, that as much as we are, as an organization, we are focused on adolescent girls and young women, we cannot also just ignore the young men in the communities. So we have piloted as well a boys mentoring program where we realize that, you know, there are a lot of toxic social norms that are entrenched to young boys or around what does it mean to be a man. And these contribute to, you know, to increased gender-based violence. When I talk about the gender norms and some of the toxic norms that have been, you know, entrenched to our young boys, I just want to share a story. In 2019, I was actually facilitating a session with principals in one of the districts in Limpopo, where we were planning to roll out our program in high schools. So most of the principals were male principals that were participating. And one principal stood up and shared, like, oh, in my school, I have really a challenge with teenage pregnancy, and I'm hoping that, you know, with Seoul City being on board, we will be able to address some of the issues. And he shared that one of the boys, who was in matric at that point, had impregnated 5 girls from the same school, from the different grades. And the reaction of the other principals, who were mainly male, started clapping. You know, they were really like clapping, whoa. So I paused and asked them, so why are we clapping? You know, so for me, it raised, so I had to sort of address it to say, are we not then, you know, encouraging toxic messages to young boys? The clapping doesn't mean that this is a man. And one principal was actually saying, when I asked, why are we clapping? And he was saying, he's a man, he's a man. So I asked them, you know, what does it mean to be a man? And for me, from that session, it really taught me, or just raised an issue that we cannot run away from, you know, programs that will also look at, you know, addressing the social norms, the gender norms that still perpetuate, you know, male dominance, male is, you know, controlling women. What does it mean to be a man? You know, what, you know, those issues that relate to toxic masculinity, you know, we need to still address. How do we shift those particular norms? So for us, providing sexuality education or sexual youth sexuality empowerment program, it has to have a very, you know, holistic approach to it. And we cannot run away from some of the gender inequalities and some of the toxic masculinity practices that are still there in our communities, and we need to find them to also address so that young women and young boys, they have healthy and they feel empowered, and we're addressing the broader issues that affect our youth in South Africa. Another point that I wanted also to look at is going forward, how do we also shift the sexual, the social norms that are still perpetuating, harmful or hateful or traumatic experiences of young women. So you still have issues like in the Eastern Cape and some parts of KZN of ukutwala young women, that are forced into marriages as early as 15-year-olds. How do we address those issues? The issue of virginity testing is still very common in KZN, but what are the impact of that in terms of understanding young people's sexuality? In one of the districts, for example, where we are working in KZN, one of the district coordinator from Department of Health was telling us that they've seen an increase in the STIs, especially amongst the girls between the ages of 15 to 19. And those are the girls who also participate in the virginity testing. And what she then said, what they found is that a lot of these young girls, they engage in anal sex because they are scared that, they cannot, engage normally because they will be seen as, as non-virgins. And if they are non-virgins, they are ostracized in their communities. They are not treated as, real women. So basically what I'm saying in addressing youth sexuality programs, it's very broad. And I think going forward as organization, we really need to look at some of the structural barriers, some of the cultural practices that affect, women's sexuality or young women's sexuality going forward. Luanda, I think I'm gonna stop here.
Thank you so much, Nelisi.
Still on time, but let me stop here and then I will really engage great. Later in the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to Patsy. Patsy, I'll let you know at 10 to 12 in the chat when your session is done. Please do go ahead. Patsy, are you there? Well, maybe we should just move on to, oh, there we go.
Yes, sorry. I'm actually trying to load my presentation for you and I'm trying to follow you. So I'm pressing share screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I need to F5. So.
Well, yeah, there we go.
Now?
Okay, now click on the PowerPoint.
Which
Yes, there we go.
Can you see it now?
Yes. And
I see. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Slideshow. Thank you. I just want to say thank you very much, I think, on behalf of Partners in Sexual Health, for allowing us to also share our work that we're doing in South Africa and in Africa as well. About 3 years ago, we moved in the space in SADC, and about a few months ago, we actually moved into about 13 African countries. So who are we? Partners in Sexual Health is an evidence base. We believe in the research and all the projects that we're doing currently within South Africa and in Africa. And our core focus is sexual reproductive health and rights. Although there is some interventions that we do with men and women, but our key area of interest lies amongst the adolescents and young people. So we were established in 2009. We are a very young organization. We're only 12 years old now. Our head office is based here in Cape Town. We have also several other offices within the Western Cape, in Beaufort West, the rural area. We have an office in the Northern Cape, and then we have an office in the Eastern Cape. Although we have only the offices in specific areas and on provinces, we also do work across South Africa with various different trainings, which I will explain, of course, to you as the time passes. So in a nutshell, our vision is an empowered society on sexual reproductive health and rights. So not to waste any time, my presentation, I've laid it out like this. So what I will do is I will speak on each and every project that we're currently doing, just to give people an overview of the work that we're actually doing in the ground. So in terms of in-school youth, obviously our focus is very zoomed into comprehensive sexuality education. So we do quite a lot of interventions when it comes to young people in schools, not just in our areas where our offices are based. We do surrounding towns because our focus is very much rural orientated, and specifically in the areas where people lack not to provide these type of services. So we have a very strong relationship with the Department of Education, provincially and nationally, where we are guided obviously by the manuals in terms of CSE, which was recently developed, and PSH was part and parcel of the development of that CSE manual. So we work very closely with DBE, and our approach within the schools is PSH employ mostly young people. We believe that young people, because our focus is young people, we employ young people, and the message in the action will be very much more impactful. Therefore, our staff is it's highly, I think 70% of our staff is consisting of young people, and obviously old people like me, but it's young at heart. So yeah, we have some little bit of people there in our organization. It's a bit old, but then again, young at heart. So our comprehensive sexual education basically in schools. Our approach is where our staff is highly trained on sexual reproductive health and rights, specifically zooming into CSE. And what we do is we will then be able to support the life orientation teacher during the school hours, of course. We negotiate time and spaces for our staff in school. So most of our staff, we have actually offices in the school where we deal with these young people. And then what we also try to do is we build up referral systems. So if we, for instance, do comprehensive sexual education, our staff will pick up a lot of issues that's happening in school or with the learners specifically. And if there is referral need to be, we do so. So we will support these young people and we refer them. In fact, we actually go the extra mile by taking these people, if we have to the clinics, to the police, if need be. So that these young people can actually get support, because what we picked up is that we tend to train and educate our young people on comprehensive sexual education, but when there is support needed, the support is lacking. And specifically if our young people listen to the previous speaker in terms of our teenage pregnancy rate, I mean, a lot of our young people will not go and confined in their parents specifically. So PSH plays a huge role in terms of even connecting these young people with their parents if need be, or alternatively, we had several cases where some of these young people, because abortion is legal, we will actually support them to get abortion services, and we will accompany them to these different services if the need arises. But we had several cases which we actually did that. So yeah, there's quite a lot of things that we can talk about comprehensive sexual education. I think the issues that the previous speaker talked about, this is exactly what we experience on the field and on the ground with our young people. But our approach is very much integrated, comprehensive, and we try to make sure that our young people get the best support where possible. Moving to our out-of-school youth, we deal with out-of-school youth. In fact, when PSH started in 2009, we had about only 30 schools when we started the organization. And what we've learned there is that there was a huge gap in terms of out-of-school youth, because majority of the people focus on a confined space because the school setting is easy. So we developed an out-of-school manual to deal with out-of-school youth. We in fact did a study with the Department of Social Development on our out-of-school youth manual and the approach that we're taking. And just to make an example in terms of our out-of-school youth is that because we have youth staff, it's very easy to attract these out-of-school youth people, which is obviously unemployed and not school going. As an example, for instance, in the Eastern Cape, which is amazing, is that majority of our sessions that we're having with our out-of-school youth is actually attended by men and boys. Which is a very interesting and fascinating that actually came out of these things, is because it's usually the young woman that comes to these sessions. But in the Eastern Cape specifically, it's men that's very interesting to attend our sessions. So what they've done, what we do within our sessions when it comes to out of school, it's an absolutely vibrant type of atmosphere. We usually get about 15 to 20 out of school young people around and have sessions almost on a weekly basis. And so these young people then come up with their own type of topics, and there is a discussion point. So what we try to make sure is that we not only just focus on the SRHR needs, sometimes they will just have normal discussions so that we can make sure that we actually attract these young people. In relation to our teen parenting, which is actually very also, we've done a study first and foremost. We've done a study first and foremost where we try to find out how can we make sure that the people, the teen parents or the young people, that these young people actually go back to school, because that's ultimately our aim in terms of teen parenting and teenage pregnancies, is to make sure that we make sure that these young people are not being again pulled into a repetition of where these young people go to school and they have to drop out, and at the end of the day, they don't get education. So our study revealed that if we involve the parents, significantly, the chances of these young girls going back to school actually increased. So our teen parenting and prevention of teenage pregnancy project is exactly that. So we make sure that these young people, if they get pregnant in school, we build relationship with the Department of Health. So locally, we have partnership with the local clinics. And every month we get an update. For instance, if there is a young girl that is pregnant, and what we then do is we contact these young people, and then we set up meetings after obviously a lot of sessions. We get the parents involved and making sure that there is some type of a support structure. But our core function here is, because obviously we cannot prevent the pregnancy anymore, we make sure that these young girls get the support structure so that they can actually go back to school. It's an amazing project. It's working well. I think PSH staff even go so far by organizing sometimes, because I know some of the economic positions within our communities and amongst these young parents are very difficult. So PSH will even go sometimes the extra mile to organize these people's matric balls and stuff like that. We also, in some cases where these young girls do not have support, PSH steps in. I said previously, that is one of our roles, to not just educate, but we also support. So some of our staff will even go take them to the hospital and support them when they are in labor. So we genuinely try to do a very much holistic approach and support when it comes to our teen parents specifically. In terms of teenage pregnancy prevention, that we focus on when we do comprehensive sexuality, of course, in schools. We're dealing with victim empowered and gender-based violence. We have a variety of different gender-based violence projects across South Africa. Specifically also looking at victim empowerment. Here we formed strong partnerships with South African police. And we have employed social workers. So the social workers usually deal with the cases, and we support these young people. In a sense, we're not zooming much in just only on young people here, because we picked up now, ever since we started this victim empowerment project and gender-based violence project 2 years ago, the increase in the need is massive. So we've decided to open it up to the broader community and to support these people, not only from a legal perspective, but also to ensure that they get the necessary support. So yeah, we deal with victim empowerment. Maybe just to share for instance, in the Beaufort West area, we went so far by, we had cases where these young people were sexually assaulted, and it's very difficult that you can actually take this young person back to that same house where the perpetrator is. So what we've done and what we've identified, we've looked at mothers, community members within the community in Beaufort West. We've identified them. So if there is, for instance, a sexual assault or a rape case, the police will phone PSH as the first point of departure. We will then support the police by taking this child to the hospital, and after that, consulting, obviously, because we have social workers, we will then try to put these young people in a safe space, which we've identified with the mothers within the community. Then we also do wellness services. This includes not just HIV and AIDS, but family planning, almost like in a very much broader scope. We deal with this type of services at different universities. We also deal with the government employees, especially here in Beaufort West. Sorry, not Beaufort West, in Cape Town, in the Western Cape. We provide wellness services to all government employees in the Western Cape. And then obviously we look at the broader space. In the beginning, I have to admit, government employees were reluctant to get services from us, but I think over the years we've built up such a good relationship that these people now, that the influx of government employees coming to our services have increased significantly. Obviously, under the COVID-19, it's a bit difficult sometimes now. I think everybody's experienced the same thing. But we try to come around and come up with innovative ways and means. How do we deal with our services? We provide youth-friendly clinics and mobile clinics to provide SRHR services specifically to our young people. We've moved over now to open a social enterprise on a social enterprise model, where we open a clinic where we charge some of our people a certain amount of fee, where we provide specifically reproductive health services to the people. Yeah, it's a mouthful that we're doing. The Adolescent Girls and Young Women and Girls program. We focus, this project focus mostly obviously also in schools. PSH almost created a vehicle where we build up the demand. We make sure that we do comprehensive sexual education within the schools, and then also where we cannot provide the services, we refer. But what we've learned now specifically, because this project we do in about 30 schools here in the Western Cape, that the need for counseling is so overwhelming that we had to appoint an additional social worker. And even prior to our meeting, I had a conversation with some of our staff, which said that the need for counseling is genuinely more than we anticipated. We now need to look to appoint an additional social worker to look at our needs of our young people, because clearly there's a massive need for interventions when it comes to psychosocial support for our young people, specifically within the school structure. We've recently done a study and a project combined, looking at young people with disabilities, comprehensive sexual education and young people with disabilities. The study and work we've done in partnership with the UNFPA and MRC. We are blessed where we developed lesson plans. We've developed also for the community and for specifically the teachers now, resource guide. What we've learned out of our study and our intervention is that our teachers lack massive knowledge on how to deal with comprehensive sexual education when it comes to young people with disabilities. And I think these manuals and resource guides that we've developed, which is the first of its kind, even in Africa, will be a great source for teachers to actually provide comprehensive sexual education for young people with disabilities. Department of Education are very interested in taking us up on the materials and the documents and manuals we've developed. And we are hopeful to expand these lesson plans and resource guides for teachers who deal with young people with disabilities, not just within school, but also with out of school. Last but not least, we have a youth network across South Africa, where we have about 6,000-7,000 members. We believe that young people should be at the forefront of the issues, and this is very much in relation not to service delivery issues also, but to look at advocacy and lobbying, and specifically from a community point of view. So our young advocates identify issues within the community. We support them directly. And then what we've done is we've trained them tremendously, and then they do interventions on behalf of their community. And also what we've tried to do is that we've developed layers, obviously, so it's on a community layer, district layer, provincial layer, national layers. So there is National Steering Committee, which PSH is obviously the lead. Our youth network is in partnership with the Department of Social Development Population Unit. So we get support from all the provincial population units within the different provinces to support these initiatives that these young people actually come about or identify. And then also we will do joint advocacy campaigns across South Africa. I've mentioned our movement. We've just established it in March 2021. We currently have about 85 youth-led organizations. Here, we're not focusing specifically on the individual, but rather on the organization. One of the things that we picked up in our lifetime is that we have a lot of youth organizations in our countries, but the support is lacking majorly. So we developed this movement to support youth-led organizations, and PSH is almost like the mother organization to provide them with mentorship, empowerment. We've developed and established steering committee members within these young people, and we foresee that the issues when it comes to the policies that is all out there in our different African countries, but the biggest challenge that we have is implementation, that these young people can push the agenda to make sure that policies are actually implemented on the ground. The previous speaker talked about parents. We do training on intergenerational communication on adolescents, SRHR. We be the parents, or we bring elder people together to discuss and open up in terms of talking about sexuality, the broader context, obviously, of CSA. Maybe just to share, one of our training sessions we had, one of the gogos actually, which we've invited, that was part and parcel of this intergenerational communication training, stood up and in front of everybody said she was so empowered that she can now openly say that she's actually HIV positive, and that this training opened her eyes to realize the importance of how important it is to communicate with young people surrounding these issues, but also what they've made them to believe as to their own barriers that is there, and that nobody helped to break down, that our training actually achieved exactly that. And that's why she could stood up there and say that she's HIV positive. Then we have a radio, which I'm very proud of. It's called PSH Radio. It's an online radio, which is man-run by the youth. We've trained them on all the skills that's needed. I would love people to join in and sometimes listen to our radio station. We address all the relevant issues you can think of in terms of SRHR. We also invite speakers or guests, which they interview. This is not just for South Africa, because this is an internet-based online radio station. We reach also people across the world, but our main focus is zooming in into Africa. So we have on a daily basis different sessions which we share, and making sure that our young people get educated on the relevant different issues when it comes to SRHR and which affects them most. Last but not least, we've recently started a project under the Spotlight Initiative, looking at gender-based violence, sexual violence, sexual reproductive health and rights in Africa. And this is in partnership with the UN Women and the African Union. PSH are leading the Civil Society Regional Reference Group, where we bring humans groups, social movements, youth movements together to actually make sure that all the different policies and ratification and treaties that is there, that is implemented. And also, I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with the Spotlight Initiative, but it's quite big. It's funded by the European Union, and all the partners and organizations that is implementing this initiative, we will bring all the relevant people together and to make sure that there is interrelation and interworking, so that ultimately that we have the most and best impact when it comes to our interventions on the ground. I've talked about Siakwazi, I've mentioned it. The young people, as you know, they say nothing happens for us without us. So yeah, that is what our youth network actually does in South Africa. Last but not least, social media had to start playing a bigger role. In fact, PSH moved tremendously towards social media because of the COVID-19. So majority of our work that we're doing now is to develop short videos, advocacy campaign on gender-based violence, on relevant issues that we think is relevant. We developed it, we put it on our different platforms, shared amongst our movement partners and our network partners. And to create some type of information, because obviously sometimes, as you know, the schools were closed, so we were unable to reach a lot of people. So our social media component and online approach, actually COVID-19 made us aware that we need to zoom in, and because young people are very much more onto social media. So we are in a process to develop quite a lot of different things when it comes to social media, and share our work or provide education on SRHR with young people via social media. And on that note, I say thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patsy. That was very interesting. We have one more speaker today, Beryl. You can go ahead and share.
Yolandi, if you can just let me know that you see it, then I know everyone else does.
Yes, everything's perfect there. If you want, you can put on your video if you would like to.
Okay, I just don't want to mess with my network, but I will put it on for the discussion.
Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this awesome opportunity to be speaking in this amazing platform. And when deciding what kind of approach I wanted to take in with regards to what we want to talk about as Love Life as an organization, I decided to share the programs that we do, and most importantly, the learnings that come from those engagements with young people. What are young people saying? What are parents saying? Because that's who Love Life has always been. You know, that's who we were from the beginning in 1999, and we continue to use what we learn from people as a way to strengthen our programs and the offerings that we have for young people. So with the launch of the toolkit, I thought, you know, it would be a good opportunity to share what we do, and most importantly, share what we get from what we do. So that we can figure out what do we do with that information when a parent calls you frantic to say, my 14-year-old son is in a state because this girl that he's been crushing on has a WhatsApp status that says Libra feminine, mostly agender, but with a strong connection to femininity. Now my son wants to know what that means. Does it mean that he's gay because he's attracted to someone? So all of those things. So what do we do with that information that we are constantly receiving, and then make sure that there's so many of us doing good work, but make sure that what we know as NGOs gets put into the right spaces for us to genuinely be these organizations that are for youth, by youth, inspired by youth. So who we are. So Love Life has a vision of being a leader in youth health promotion. In the beginning, everybody knew us as the HIV or the condom organization. And since then, we've really evolved to be an organization that looks at the complete health of a young person. And we follow the description by the World Health Organization that talks about the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. Because like I saw in one of the comments, it's so true that a young person who's constantly thinking about their sexuality and not understanding it is not a healthy person. Someone who's constantly thinking about what job will I have, we're poor, we don't have this, we don't have that. That's not a healthy person, even though they are physically absent of disease. So that's why we've taken this stance as an organization to be a leader in youth health promotion. So that's just our mission statement: to promote social activism for healthy living, active lifestyle, and HIV consciousness amongst young people through information, education, and awareness campaigns, behavior change interventions and programs, advocacy, as well as sport. So this just gives us the timeline of Love Life. When we started in 1999, getting people talking, taking that information. I remember it was, the tagline was Love Life, talk about it. So that was about sexuality, talking about sex, talking about HIV, and having those intergenerational conversations that were paving the way for the kind of program interventions that we would have. And then the birth of the Groundbreaker program between 2000 and 2003. And then just, yeah, this just goes through where we've been and what some of the changes have been in the organization. So we've always had a strong understanding that high-risk behavior among adolescents and youth is influenced by a range of drivers at individual, social, and structural levels. And these drivers increase vulnerability when it comes to SRHR. So when we have our conversations with young people, or Groundbreakers have conversations with young people, we find this coming out more and more, that it can always be packaged into those three sections that young people have decided to make a choice or a decision, and it would always be based on one of these three. So the Love Life approach, we have three programmatic packages: the Healthy Lifestyle Package, the Active Lifestyle Package, and the Youth Leadership Development Package. Like I said before, a young person who is constantly worrying about it being a job, having a job, is not a healthy person. Person who is physically, is someone who's obese, is not a healthy person. Someone who is has a physical disease is not a healthy person. So we're looking at all of those things and having these interventions packaged within each of these areas. And then with our psychosocial support that we do through our contact center, our strong media and social media platforms, radio, and our strong partnerships with relevant stakeholders that can support our work and who we can support their work. So the ideal for us is to get to a point where we say, what does this young person who has been through a healthy lifestyle package, youth leadership development package, active lifestyle package, has received psychosocial support from our contact center, has engaged with us on radio and social media, have been linked to an opportunity through our strong partnerships. What does that young person look like when all of those things collide? What kind of choices do they make? And for us to really get to understand what will need to be done to increase the number of young people who are exactly that young person that has experienced all of these intervention packages. So this just further breaks down what each programmatic area looks at. The Healthy Lifestyle Package looks at comprehensive sexual education, adolescent and youth-friendly services, community-focused activations for youth health promotion, alcohol and substance abuse, prevention, teen pregnancy prevention, teen parent support, gender-based violence, etc. And then the active lifestyle package. Before, we would have a Love Life Games package where we would say that that's the carrot that draws the young people, and then when they are there, we give them information around sexual and reproductive health, condoms, whatever it might be. But now we've packaged different activities within that, so that we are able to quickly, because sports days, they might last a long time, but we don't have as much interaction with those young people because they're playing. We have to find ways to engage with them through while they are playing. So we've developed the Coach for Life program because we've found that, you know, we have this idea that athletes are okay, you know, because they're playing, they are engaged in something positive, you know, they're fine. But we found more and more that you'd have young people speaking to their coaches about, you know, I don't want to play anymore because I'm very uncomfortable with the jokes that my teammates make around sexuality, or a young girl just suddenly doesn't know what to do with this body that has hips and breasts and all of that, and so they drop out of playing. So we've formulated this Coach for Life program where we speak to coaches, where we train coaches to say, you are such an important person to these young people. So when these things happen, when this is how you speak to them, this is who you refer them to, and so forth. And then our Sport for Change initiatives are ones really about sport for development, where we use sport to bring people together to talk about topical issues or challenges that young people are facing. And then our youth leadership and development, this is about skills development. Our groundbreaker program falls in that category, and community volunteer program, the Mpinchi program, as well as like staff wellness and so forth. But I won't talk too much about that because we're talking about young people today. Where and how do we implement? So our main source of interaction with young people is through our groundbreaker program. Who are our peer mentors. So they are aged between the age of 18 and 25, and they reach young people at various touch points in support of SRH linkages. So for many years, Love Life has been an advocate for adolescent and youth-friendly services. This is after research showed that young people don't want to go to the clinic because they're treated badly and so forth. So we're still very much involved in that, training facilities around that. And now with the introduction of youth zones, which is time and space for young people specifically, groundbreakers play a very important role in the promotion of youth zones, being part of the integrated school health program, going there with nurses and to make sure that young people know about what's available at the facilities, and making sure that they come and access those services that are at those clinics. So they're based at clinics, at Love Life Y centers or youth centers, partner hubs, and sport hubs, and they offer this peer education and to strengthen referral system to improve access to health services. And so these young people host also community dialogues, we call the intergenerational ones, where we get families and parents and young people speaking born-free dialogues. They host those sport events, youth health festivals, where we bring services to the people through our other partners. So while we have this festival going on, there are other partners who are doing HIV testing, blood pressure testing, TB screening, and so forth. and so, yes, and very important is around mobilization at hotspots where young people hang out to create demand for SRH services. Then the Love Life Y centers, we've got, I think it's 22 now across the country. And these are just safe spaces for young people to talk to a coordinator, a groundbreaker, safe spaces to do their work. There's vitality rooms at some of them where there's a nurse, we have a doctor at one, and we have counselors where we can also provide families and young people with counseling services. And then social media and radio, and I know the speaker before me spoke about how COVID really made us rethink about how we use our social media platforms to be more for strengthen our interactions with young people. And an interesting thing that keeps coming up, you have a young person who is obviously not well. You know, they'll write to you like the example that I have here to say that I've got sticky discharge. Some have pimples and warts, but they won't go to the clinic. They'll first post it on social media asking, what should I do? I have this. And then we'll have to say, go to the clinic, you know, make sure this and this and this and that. And it's an interesting thing for us to note that, I mean, you know that you're not well, but your first point would become to say, come and ask Love Life on your social media platforms, what should I do? And what does that mean, really? What is that young person going through? What is it that they actually need from us as Love Life by them reaching out to us? So these are very also closely linked with our contact center, what calls we get, putting that content together for our social media based on the calls that we get, and making sure that we stretch the reach. One caller who called into our contact center, we're now touching hundreds or thousands of other young people who have the same issue, but maybe are just sitting in silence wondering what to do. And then we have our radio programs as well, weekly radio programs on community radio stations, where we just reinforce whatever's going on, and whether it's at our face-to-face interactions or whether it's something that we are doing on social media, where all of these messages always link in some way so that this message is reinforced on the various platforms. And then this is our contact center information. So young people will send a please call to 083 323 1023, and one of our counselors will call them back. So I just added some information about, you know, the types of the categories that people would call for, and how interesting it was for us to see how many young people call around termination of pregnancy. And yet, you know, in a lot of conversations and all of that, you just find how taboo that is, and so forth. So the information that we get from our contact center is very helpful in terms of what we want to communicate to young people. So I've just put a slide together to just show some of our learnings, particularly of relevance to this RAPP event. It's that the investing in getting young people to understand self is such an important thing. I think a lot of programs, or interventions, because you are looking for numbers, you'd rather have this large group of young people interacting. But how do you even start to begin to have the conversation about somebody and them knowing what consent is when they don't even know, what am I feeling? How do I feel? Do I like this? Do I like that? Where do I want to go? So that groundwork around that individual. Who are you as an individual? And it'll also take us away from treating all young people the same. And so that's something that comes up time and time again. So we make sure that we have in our interventions space to make sure that young people have this opportunity to get to know who they are. Experience, so yes, it's around access to SRHR services. And this is due to a variety of factors. It's not just because they don't access it because there's no friendly or warm person to welcome them at the clinical healthcare facility, but it includes affordability, knowledge, feelings, personal feelings, beliefs, availability, and so forth. There's a lot of work that needs to be done around increasing knowledge around SRHR among young people, particularly rights, and understanding what exactly is a right, and how is that linked to SRHR, and understanding what you can and cannot do and where to go. It is something that there's still so much that needs to be done. This one also including boys in conversations when trying to deal with issues affecting girls. I mean, we get so many calls, so many inbox messages. I want to use a condom, but my boyfriend doesn't want to use a condom, and so forth. And so, you know, you can't have a conversation with girls talking to them about using contraceptive, taking care of their health, but you're not having the conversation with boys who are testing whether or not they're HIV positive through a pregnant girlfriend. So those kind of things are really important. There's definitely still need for family-orientated program and messaging. I think it was Deirdre in the comments, and I even had to comment on that, because there's so much that that families and parents and adults perpetuate. For example, I mean, you have a coordinator sitting in public transport, and a mom will say to their daughter that I'll give you a taxi fare to get there, but coming back, that's on you. There's nobody with a working vagina that can't see themselves home. So there's just things like that that come up in all our in this anecdotal data that we collect. And then for us to say, what do we do with this information? Where to from here? It can't just sit at Love Life if we are truly going to be making an impact in South Africa. And although massive inroads have been made with regards to building capacity among health officials and health facility staff around AYFS, there's still a lot that needs to be done. And just taking it beyond, and when we start talking about SRHR or sexualities and rights within that, taking it beyond healthcare facilities and taking this AYFS model to police stations and anywhere where young people are accessing help for them to receive someone who's willing to listen to them. And that is me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beryl. I'm going to open the floor now for some questions. We've got a few here on the chat. For instance, Annalie Pistorius asked, I think she asked Nelisiwe specifically. She says, wonderful work. Does Seoul City also run these programs at special schools that are still there in communities for children living with intellectual disabilities? And can you say a bit about this? Nelisiwe, if you can put on your video as well as where are you now? Patsy is no longer with us, so all the questions will be going to Beryl and Nelisiwe.
I nearly realized she's muted. Okay, there she goes.
Just hold on, sis. Let me call you back. Let me call you back. When you're meeting and I was trying to squeeze you. Can I call you back in 10 minutes? Okay.
Well, anyone can put up their hands. If I have any questions, I'll put it through. Nelisiwe, do you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Sorry, I had a connection issue.
No problem. I've got a question for you from Annalie Pistorius. She says,
Yes.
wonderful work. Does Seoul City also run these programs at special schools that are still there in the communities for children living with intellectual disabilities? And can you say a bit about this?
In some of the, we do have in some of the schools with children with disabilities, but one of the key challenges in one of the schools, I think it's School for the Blind, was to try and translate the material into what's the reading part of the schools with children with who are blind,
Right.
into Braille. So that was the only issue that we found that it was quite expensive. But yes, we do try and involve special schools as well. It's just that we need to also modify or adjust our material so that they are simple enough for facilitator to be able to use with children with disability. I think generally, when it comes to such programs, working with children with special need or youth with special need, it's still a gap. I think as Seoul City, I'm admitting that it's something that we still need to, look into and do it comprehensively, working with that sector.
Thank you, Nelisiwe. Just before I let you go, Deirdre, I'm just going to read this question from Yolandi Lottering to Beryl. Is Love Life only operating in certain areas currently?
Thank you. So we are in all 9 provinces, but we are not in all districts. So I'll just get all of the information, but we are in all 9 provinces and quite a large spread in terms of the local municipalities that we work in.
Thanks, Beryl. Deirdre, you can go ahead and ask your question. Deirdre, are you there?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. In fact, let me just do this because it's very, how do I start video? Sorry. Right, there we go. Sorry about that. So I guess I've got observations and queries on sort of for both groups of presenters. And I guess what's interesting is I come at this, just so that you know where I fit in, I come at this from a child protection perspective. So my program, Courage Child Protection, was actually developed to help sort of gatekeepers of child protection officers, to try and understand what are some of the child protection challenges they're dealing with. But more and more, my child protection officers are actually children. And so more and more, this is an area that I'm moving into. Initially, it was in the area of crisis pregnancy and option counseling. But now I suddenly, suddenly people start saying, oh, you should do something about, kind of sexuality and stuff like that. So you kind of get pushed in. So I'll be very interested in using all of these kind of tools to try and apply to my sort of approach, which is very much picture-based. I guess my question and observation to the implementing teams, all of which I think is just phenomenal what you guys are doing and your reach. But in my experience with youngsters, they're always asking kind of what's in it for me? Why should I be engaging with you? Yes, certainly I want to get information and I want to be more knowledgeable, but I can always go and see a lot of the stuff on Pornhub or whatever. And so, I guess the way I've got around it is my sort of sales pitch to the youngsters is I'm going to teach you strategy. I'm going to teach you to think strategically about all of these challenges that you're up against. As I say, specifically from a child perspective point of view. But I wondered if, other than, we get a fun afternoon and we get some cool stuff, how are you addressing this issue of, because for mostly young people, they want to know what's in it for them. And sometimes things like, I think Love Life is definitely heading in that direction, but things like just being more aware or having a forum where you can share your perspective is not enough. They want to almost know kind of what's the payoff at the end of the day for them and how is this going to grow them as individuals and so on, which we know it will, but I'm interested in if any of these wonderful organizations have had that experience and how they've dealt with it. And then I guess the comment from the kind of more academic side, and it's something I've always struggled with because only recently gone back to I guess in the last 7 or 8 years gone back to academia, is just this real gap between just watching the presentations in how academics approach these challenges versus how, and this came up in the conversation, how are we bridging that gap between academia and sort of practical implementation, where you can't talk about things like, you can't use the kind of language, I think Susan talked about it earlier, you can't use the kind of language, and that kind of language immediately people start going, well, I don't actually know what you're talking about, that we see in academic texts, but we understand the importance of it, but how are we bridging the gap between the theory and the practice? And I guess that's for both sides. you know, I certainly would love to go through this toolkit and just almost assess all of my tools, which is really just picture-based stuff that people can go and access, and it's posters helping you try and navigate this world of child protection, of which sex and sexuality and sexual abuse and gender-based violence is a big part of. So those are my questions. I hope it's clear.
I think if Sarah and Divya also want to add something, but go ahead, Beryl or Nelisiwe.
Can I go now?
You can go ahead, Beryl.
Sorry about that. So I'll just answer the question around piquing interest, and it is something that we've found as an organization over the years. And a few years back, we had this Mobi site called I Love Life, where we were incentivizing young people for good behavior. So if you visited the clinic, you got an HIV test, you'd move up tiers and you'd get vouchers and so forth. And you know, there was a view to say that we shouldn't incentivize people for good behavior, they should just behave well. But then at the same time, programs where you really focus and or you have the time to tell young and that's why I emphasize this, the point about getting young people to understand who they are. You end up having a program where you have to cut that time because you have the numbers. So at the end of the day, getting someone to be interested or piquing interest is very difficult. And I think we're blessed as an organization because we have our Y centers. So there's always traffic in and out, and we can find, and our coordinators and groundbreakers can recognize people who constantly are there. And also we have our sport programs that there's some incentives for being part of that. And then while you're there, you're learning about other things, but it's a real problem. I mean, we're in competition with sectors that are spending billions to get young people interested. I mean, you're up against the pop bottles life and saying you should do good. We don't have to incentivize you for being good is really a disservice to the organization and the young people. So that's where we are, Deirdre. I hope I've answered you, but yeah. But it's also very interesting the stuff that you're doing around child protection. We've had to do quite a lot around that, you know, making sure our policies are sound, making sure the people who work with our young people are vetted and are doing the right thing at all times, and young people know where they can go if there was any kind of violation, and putting parents at ease as well. It's not like the old days where you know that, oh, my kid's playing soccer, they're all right. You know, things are very different now. So thank you so much for the question. I hope I've covered you, and thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think we're all in the same position. And I think maybe we should be having conversations around, you know, how do we compete against the Coca-Colas and the PlayStations and because we do have to, and they're learning stuff, you know, when they're playing Call of Duty, they're learning stuff about social interaction and, you know, we don't want to say that these things maybe make people more violent, but they learn how to interact with each other and engage with each other in those spaces. And we're competing there because we're competing for kind of share of voice. But yeah, maybe that's another conversation, but thanks.
If I may also just add, Deandre, as well, from what Beryl was saying, you know, there's been a lot of theories around, you know, incentivizing programs. What we have found as Seoul City is that sometimes it's not sustainable. So you might find a sponsor that will, you know, incentivize women to come to your club meetings, and they get like data, for example, as simple as that. But if the sponsor then a year later or 2 years later, they pull out, then what happens? Just from our experience, we've also found out that, you know, the younger ones, as long as you keep your programs interesting, they continue to come to your sessions. But what becomes a reality is your out of school youth, because there you are dealing with young women who are mothers themselves already, The issues of bread and butter are realities for them. So if you are running an out-of-school program, definitely you have to look at the economic component. Either linking them up with employment opportunities or some skills training or entrepreneurship opportunities that are available in the different communities. So you can't just run the psychosocial or the sexual reproductive health without including the economic component, because the reality is that they have to feed their children. They want to, also when you want to address the issue of blessers, or sugar daddies, encouraging young women to be independent and not depend on men, you have to include the economic empowerment component in your program. So previously in our work, we have done some work where we will partner with organizations like your Harambee for young women who are seeking employment. You look at your NYDA programs, you look at the municipalities, what entrepreneurial programs do they have? So yes, what's in for me in terms of my other needs, it's a reality. And we need to continue, I think, engaging, like you were saying, Annette.
Great, thank you.
Yolandi, can I just speak to Sarah's, Deirdre's question about the academia to the translation?
Yes, go ahead.
So I mean, I think what you have identified there of the the gulf that exists between what happens in academia and what happens kind of on the ground, as it were, or in programs is a very real one. And this is precisely why we have started this RAPP event, Research in Relation to Advocacy, Policy and Practice, is to open up the dialogue. And I think that when we open up that dialogue more, then there is exactly the thing of mutual learning, and a kind of a corrective logic that happens in the academic space, where people will go, well, actually that's just like completely pie in the sky, but also then perhaps a corrective logic the other way, in terms of what lens, asking questions, what lenses are we using, how are we actually approaching the practices, the advocacy, the policy that we do. So I think it can be potentially a very rich space to have that dialogue, and we definitely need to have more of that, and to, in terms of academics, start having publications that are much more accessible, not just stuck away in journal articles in kind of academic keys, as it were, but also that are policy briefs, that are blogs, that are newspaper articles, etc., etc. The one difficulty is that academics tend to write as academics, and so I, for example, have been told a couple of times by newspaper writers, where I've tried to make a sort of more accessible writer, well, you're just writing like an academic, please can you write some other way? So there's a learning process that we have to go through, and but I think you've really pinned, you've put your finger on an important issue that we need to do better at.
Katrina, if I can just add, I mean, as a note to self, I thought your toolkit the toolkit is fantastic, and my intention for my own program, just out of this, is to go through each of those different levels, those 7 different levels, and almost give myself a little scorecard, and maybe also illustrate where I'm meeting your criteria, examples of how I meet I meet your criteria versus how I don't. So I mean, as a tool, an assessment tool for when you're putting stuff out there, like I was sitting there cringing because I was thinking, I've just done a video around, after those dreadful statistics were shared, around just what is the process of how you fall pregnant, because this is a challenge I seem to come up with all the time when I engage with young people, that you can have sex once and fall pregnant. So just a very simple, this is how conception takes place. And immediately I'm seeing concerns about the kind of language I used and the pictures and so on. So, I mean, I guess I'll commit to, as a implementer of these sorts of programs, just to see if I can try and link my work to what you guys are doing. And maybe we can have, because then we've got a starting point and say, well, where are we actually doing what we think is right and where we're really struggling? Because it's, you know, it's quite complicated and difficult when you're trying to simplify things down, especially in my world, which is all about just pictures and posters. So you are very limited, but I'll certainly commit to that.
Thank you. That's very useful.
Thanks so much. I've got a question here a little while ago from Nick McLean. Is there space in the Soul Buddies Club for gender diverse children, those outside of the gender binary?
If I may come in to respond, definitely our program, you know, it's inclusive. It's a combination of both boys and girls and any other sexual identity, you know, how you identify your sexuality or your gender. But what we find with the Soul Buddies Club program is important to also give them information and try and address the stereotypes around, you know, the LGBTI, you know, community, because children come from communities and they are from families. So if as a parent, you know, I still have that stereotype or, you know, have some kind of discriminating comments when I talk about, you know, children with, you know, different sexual orientation or people with different sexual orientation, you know, that information is, you know, also, you know, the children listen to that information and they may develop their own stereotypes. So our work with the younger age group, which is the Soul Buddies Clubs, is to you know, create an awareness that there are people with different sexual orientation, just around discrimination and learning that people have, you know, those people still have rights as well. So that's our focus with the Soul Buddies Clubs. But all children are welcome to participate in our program. So when we get into the older age groups as well, we also, you know, our programs are very inclusive. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks. Nix, do you want to add to that? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for that response. My question is really based, there was a slide where you showed you segregated young people based on gender, so very binary gender segregation, so boys and girls. And I think what I'm really kind of pushing here really is thinking around gender when speaking, sorry, there's background noise, but speaking to young people here, I think I'm troubled. I think it's a bit easiest way for me to say it, around the language where we're speaking about gender diversity and LGBTIQ plus identities and not speaking with. So what I was really asking, was there space to have sessions with young people where you had a separate space perhaps for those who are gender diverse, because those are different lived experiences for young people that you can't really capture with a binary gender identity, you know, in a very cis heteronormative world. So I guess it's a challenge really on my part to be more inclusive in a way that is actually inclusive and not necessarily diverse in content, but bringing into conversation those with different lived experiences. Thank you.
No, thank you for that feedback. I think it's something that as an organization, we will actually look into. And maybe with your support, I'm hoping that from this webinar, we will also share contact details so that maybe when we are even developing materials, you can also look and give us feedback on, you know, if it, you know, covers, you know, the diversity of, you know, different genders. But thank you for the feedback.
Thank you so much. Chanel, your hand has been up. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, mine was, I had my hand up before, a bit more to the discussion with Deirdre about kind of access to where information is coming from and NGOs and how it, you know, assessing them. And also just like getting kids or youth interested, what's their incentive. And I know you commented earlier when I think Sarah was presenting about the TV show Sex Education that's on Netflix. And I think just like, for example, in that's a very good medium. That's what young people are seeking out. They're watching TV shows, they're going on YouTube, they're going on TikTok. So I think when we kind of meet them at their medium where they want to or seek information, that's where it can be really beneficial. So for example, Partners in Sexual Health has a YouTube channel, and those videos get uploaded. So when a lot of, you know, sexually diverse individuals are looking for information on, you know, how do other non-binary people live their life, where's information on various things through their lived experiences, they will look at things like YouTube for information, or if they see something that speaks to that on Netflix or on TikTok or various other social media platforms, I think that you know, that comes into play where we're already then they can find resources on those already existing platforms where they seek that knowledge. I know it's kind of brought the conversation back around, but then also just speaking to Nix's discussion on you know, the non-binary, like where does that person fit in discussions around sex education. I mean, the TV show Sex Education actually does a very good job of identifying that and showing that it's an issue when they have a sex education like class in the show, and there are two individuals who are not on either side, you know, when they get separated, girls and boys, and kind of question the teachers, where do we go and why are we forced into different uniforms that don't conform to how we present ourselves and who we are. So I think already that helps being in that space where young people are looking.
Thanks, Chanel. Does anyone want to comment?
I think for me, I just agree with her. I think it's a gap that I think we, you know, I think such platforms allows us to then, you know, come together and relook at even the curriculum on how do we, you know, close those gaps. I agree with her.
And maybe if I could just add, to say, you know, where do these interactions or where do these activations happen to get the young people from those groups to be part of the discussions, get them to, like I presented today, to say that I wanted to use the approach of sharing learnings information that we've received from young people and how we use that information in the different programmatic areas that we have as Love Life, and all our monitoring tools has space for a young person, you know, to say, you know, male, female, and all of the different descriptions, and yet to today we only ever get male, female, female. So it just asks us the question of are they around when we're speaking? How do we make sure that we are in areas where they do speak, so that we can get that information and package conversations or interventions that definitely is inclusive of all young people.
Yes, Beryl, I completely agree. You know, is that space open enough for them to, you know, present themselves and say, sort of ask the question, where do I go, or even just bring up those topics or those issues. And I think it kind of speaks to the whole general theme that we've seen in all the presentations today, starting with Divya in Follow the Young. You know, what do they need? What do they look for? What information are they seeking out? And forming our programs and interventions around that. Where is their knowledge lacking, or where is their knowledge misinformed? You know, again, speaking to Seoul City's part of the presentation about peer learning. So once students have received the courses and have learned, and then go back into their environments of school and then speak to other students, you know, that helps them, that misinformation that students may have learned from, you know, various social media platforms, other scholars in the school, where things are, you know, for exactly like what Deirdre was saying, how do you, I think it was Deirdre, how do you get pregnant? You know, you can get pregnant after one interaction of having sex, and, you know, that misinformation that a lot of students could have, if you base the programs around where their knowledge currently is, what basics they don't have, what further information you're looking into rights, looking into empowerment and agency, where we need to assist and where we need to break ground, I think is the various kind of places where we would, you know, have to look at that.
Thank you, Chanel. I've got Nala here, has got her hand up. Would you like to speak, Nala?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I would like to go back to the point earlier made by Divya about the caution about demonization of sugar dads. And I'm happy that it's only now that I'm raising it, because when it was initially raised, I was taken aback. But with a few seconds having gone past, I recall at high school, we had a teacher that dated a school kid, and they are married now, which demonstrate the point that she was making about showing that there could be hope at times. I can almost guarantee, though, that that couple, if you were to look at their daughter who might be in high school, likelihood is that they would discourage any relationship between their daughter and a school teacher. I don't know what the response would be, especially given that when one looks at sugar daddies, more often than not, it would be married men who would engage in these relationships, and possibly not with the aim of a loving relationship, but the likelihood could be exploitation. But linked to that, maybe any member of the panel can respond to this one. I know we mentioned the aspect of culture in all this, and I want to add time as well, in that at some stage in terms of relationships, love, emotions, feelings came very secondary. And what was primary was survival, especially financial or economic survival. I don't know if any of the panel members would be able to comment. Thank you.
I'm happy to comment, Nala, through you, Yolandi.
Yes, go ahead.
So can I proceed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Nala, what you raise is really provocative, but really important. We had a case of a teacher that had sexual relations with a learner in a private school in Cape Town. There was huge outrage about the teacher and this, the abuse of power, and of course could be constructed as child sexual abuse. Similarly, the issue around sugar daddies and young girls is clearly a case of child sexual abuse, the abuse of power, and the ways in which girls are rendered vulnerable in relation to adult males in the context of poverty, in the context of unequal gender and generational inequalities in school setups. But when you talk about the teacher and the learner eventually marrying, the furore around the private school teacher and the young man, you also raise this complexity around sexuality. And our thoughts are so rationalized in relation to how we expect sexuality to look like, that these examples suggest to us that the entanglement between adulthood and childhood is not as clear as we would like it to be. These notions of age restrictions in terms of sexual expressions suggest a far more expanded understanding of sexuality. So others may condemn this idea that these relationships are completely an abuse of power. The fact is that they happen. How do we account for it? So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Divya. I have a question from Lindy. Maybe Lindy, you actually wrote down quite a few things. Why don't I give you the opportunity to just, oh, Lindy's no longer here.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. You went to the top. Sorry. Go ahead, Lindy.
Hell, I can't even remember what I wrote now. Okay, so I think I'm not going to go through my sort of points. I'm always just sort of, I'm sort of come at things from quite a Foucauldian idea. And that sometimes is, a bit problematic because it sort of challenges the sort of citizenship kind of thing as a sort of form of regulation. It's kind of, a good, positive kind of regulation, but a regulation nonetheless. So I sort of had a range of sort of thoughts, really, not kind of, wanting to trash anybody because I work in this field too. And these are the sort of things that we grapple with, these kinds of tensions, I think, in this kind of work. So I had two real main problems, and the first sort of related in a way to sort of the uneasiness around gender binary stuff that was raised by Nix and also by Kerry, I think, quite early on in today. And underlying this also is the sort of imperative, I suppose, for young people to be sexual, and that this is like the main way in which they're going to get identity established or performed in a particular way. And if we hark on and sort of connect that overriding, burning issue around kind of sexuality to ideas of hormones and puberty, I think we are going to be, we're going to go down that sort of biological sex gender route. And that's going to be, difficult to come back from. So I think we always have to sort of be sensitive that, some young people might not, for whatever reason, be, kind of sexual, that we don't want to find girls' desire to be equal to this fictive desire that men are driven by. We kind of, there's got to be some sort of critical thinking around that sort of thing. There has to be space for a variety of different positions around these sorts of things. And that it isn't just a matter of, girls being as desiring as men, it's about it's about thinking through sometimes the implications of those sorts of positions for girls. If girls, desires and pleasures are equal to men's, then their capacities to say no for whatever reason they feel they want to say no, either that's temporarily or it's kind of in a long-term lifestyle choice, or it's some kind of wanting to explore some other kind of sexualities, whatever that is, that consent then becomes coerced in some sort of way. So these sorts of positions, which try to regulate rights, are also sort of coercing us in a certain way. So that was the sort of first point, generally, critically Foucauldian, irritating, that I wanted to make. And the second point had to do with Devia's idea of following the young, kind of this, narrative around young voices, hearing young people in research. And I wholly support that. It's kind of, it's the way to go. It's kind of what we should be doing in research. But there are also cautions around that, and I can't remember who raised this issue, that we've got to have a little bit of critical thinking, because young people are often totally kind of immersed in very stereotypical sorts of positions and ideas, about men's sexuality and about, what men want. And one thing that I've been particularly interested in is that in all my research with young people, all they ever say is that there was, in inverted commas, silence in their home around sexuality. And this is seen as a kind of massive thing. It's kind of, if sex had been talked about in my family in a more open way, and in a, kind of, I would be a different person to the person I am today, which may be true, but it might also not be true. And I'm just always interested that young people in South Africa particularly are extremely vocal about the silencing effects of sexuality of their parents. Whereas in other contexts, Australia, various other, Australia and kind of Holland and kind of France and these kinds of contexts, young people are saying different things, that we don't want our parents or teachers necessarily to talk to us about sex. It's awkward, it's embarrassing. We've got to have some sort of close relationship with them to be able to talk about that. They judge us. They've got funny information that isn't relevant to what we want to know. We would rather have kind of experts, who kind of have the skills to communicate these things, so that in some way parents, are kind of left off the hook in some way, in this kind of regulation kind of environment, for having to talk to children in a particular way, to correct the misinformation, to kind of do all of those things, which are extremely hard when children know more about sex than parents do in many instances. So these are just two sort of critically sort of little Foucauldian resistances to a situation of sort of regulating how sex is talked about with young people, I suppose. And, it may be useful or not, in some kind of ways. But I just thought that they were interesting sort of resistances in a way. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lindy. Would anyone of our presenters like to respond or comment on that? Okay, it's about 2 minutes to 1. So I think what we should do is we should just say, if anyone would like to continue, or if there are specific questions, or if they would like some contact information, go ahead and, just type it in the chat or put your hand up and I'll let you speak. And for those who's got a dash, thank you so much for joining us. And we really hope that this conversation will be continued beyond this event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.